A word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. This week, we are beginning Era 2 by reading chapters Prologue, or the Prologue, I guess, through chapter 7 of The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson. Mr. Branderson, we're back. Hey there, this is Kross.
And I'm PJ.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your intoxicating weekly book club.
Crossland, you and I have so much goddamn stuff going on in our lives right now. Lots of things are changing, and if you want to hear about those changes, we just talked for like 25 minutes about all the shit that's going on in our lives. So you could... Shamelessly, I'm going to plug our Patreon again, and you should follow us on Patreon, patreon.com/wordsandwhiskey, and listen to The Devil's Cut, because I think this one's a very, very good insight into like the background of this show and all of our like current states of affairs.
Yeah, I wouldn't like call it a State of the Union or anything like that, but it did kind of have the tone of like, here's kind of our layout and plan for things, including some highlights. PJ's engagement. From that, today is our first episode discussing the... Congratulations, by the way. I'm not actually just going to roll over that.
No, you're good.
But congratulations on your engagement. Of course, cheers, and everybody send PJ well wishes. I'm going to make you post something on Instagram, so you're going to have to do that. Now, social pressure, because it's recorded.
Social media pressure.
Social media pressure. Cool. So with that, today is our first episode discussing The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson, and we are going to chat about the prologue through chapter 7. But before we do that, PJ, it's been like 2 weeks since we recorded one of these. What are you drinking?
I had no idea what I wanted to drink today when I came into this. Usually I like to sort of theme it off of something that was consumed in the book, at least during one of the early episodes of the show. And, that didn't really happen this time. There was tea. I could have done something with tea. There's turmeric.
I do feel like I fucked up. I do feel like now that you said that, I kind of fucked up because... Wax does take Allomantic whiskey shots.
Oh, he does. Shit.
Yeah.
Shit. I took a shot of rye earlier, but my cocktail has turmeric, which is a spice adjacent to tea. I'm calling it. It's not. I don't know. It's yellow. The color, the book is yellow. Like, look how well that matches. That's as close as I have to a theme. But I have what's called a glow sour out of Dave Arnold's book, Liquid Intelligence. So this is 2 ounces of gin infused with turmeric. And in that book, he infuses it using nitrogen canisters. I didn't have that. So I just put it in a mason jar and shook the shit out of it for a long time and then put it through a coffee filter. I don't know if it's the same. Worked pretty well. Turned my drink bright yellow. So 2 ounces of gin infused with turmeric, 3/4 of an ounce of simple syrup, 3/4 of an ounce of lime juice, and 2 dashes of orange bitters, all shaken and served into a coupe glass. So nice. Crossland has a picture of it. It is bright yellow. It is so goddamn yellow. Very, very heavy in all of the flavors in a really jarring but delicious way. Like it is lime and turmeric, and that's basically what it tastes like. But I didn't expect it to taste as good as it does. It's got a hint of like tang, and I don't know why, because it shouldn't, other than the color. And maybe it's just like my mind expecting tang when I see this neon yellow drink in front of me. But I get that feeling out of it for some goddamn reason. I don't understand it. Maybe it's citrus, lime, but yeah. Back half beer. I have Portage Brewing Company's Year 5. So this is an anniversary triple IPA with Strata, Sabro Cryo, Citra, and Citra Cryo hops. Portage is a brewery out of Walker, Minnesota that a couple years ago burned to the ground. And they, in amazing fashion, have come back full force. This beer is, I say this with all honesty, one of the best IPAs I've had, period. It is very, very, very good. It's very good.
I'm exceedingly jealous.
I'm going to pick up another 4-pack of it before it's all gone. So anyway, that's me. What are you drinking, Crossland?
You actually called me right before the show asking, kind of what we were thinking and things like that. And we kind of worked through the solution. My parents went up to Charlotte this weekend and bought some, they kind of went to like a local fair thing, and they bought some syrups, a variety of syrups. And we're like, hey, whatever, try these. And a lot of them are, fairly kind of classic. I would call them, generally speaking, like a little bit more elevated version of your average cocktail syrup that you or I might make at home, where it's pretty much straightforward. These are using even some more refined blends of spices and are getting a little bit more specific and granular, more than like a ginger syrup being really just, boiled blended ginger, nutmeg, the whole 9 yards. Anyway, point being, without ranting too much, they got me these 5 different syrups, and I wanted to do something with one of them, and I decided on the peach rosemary syrup. As you and I talked about it, we were going to make an improved whiskey cocktail with it, basically removing the absinthe, because that would cut through the profile a little bit too much. Peach is a very soft flavor, didn't make sense. And as I began to pour my ingredients into my vessel, I quickly substituted whiskey for tequila. So this is my improved whiskey tequila cocktail, which is 2 ounces of tequila, half an ounce of peach rosemary syrup, 1/4 ounce of maraschino, and a dash of Angostura bitters, which is more than enough. You don't want to overwhelm the profile. I really love it. This is delicious. I expected it to be good. A lot of those substitutions that we had kind of talked about, making sure that we didn't blow out the profile. I was like, tequila change might be weird, but I didn't want the peach to go up against like a really aggressive bourbon because I wasn't sure how well it would hold up. And I was like, fuck it. And I didn't want it to be vodka because, plain palate is good, but then really all you're getting is the syrup for the most part. So tequila made the vessel, and Casamigos tequila already has an almost interesting like bubblegummy taste to it, like a little bit. So the peach really kind of comes through in a fantastic way, and it's delicious. The only thing I would change is, because it's a stirred cocktail, I would add a sprig of rosemary when stirring and then remove it, or like garnish in post with one. But that's it. That's all I would do. It's the only change I would make.
Nice.
Yeah. Just to bolden that rosemary flavor a little bit.
Mm. I could see some almost like caramelized sugar getting added to that too. Like torched brown sugar or something. I don't know.
You definitely could. I mean, the improved whiskey cocktail is typically made with a sugar cube. I mean, obviously we're wanting to highlight the syrup here, but you could absolutely, maybe in the place of the maraschino within reason, because the maraschino adds a little bit of sweet backbone to it too, but complexity. So I don't know. I think that you're right. You're onto something with the idea of adding the brown sugar. But I almost would want to maybe do that, like browned sugar, I should say, not brown sugar. Almost would want to do that in like a slightly different mixture. I don't know that I would do this precise cocktail, but I would use the syrups. I can see the flavors and I can imagine it and I can already taste it. Like it's there. Like your idea is there. I just don't know. I don't know which direction to pull it in. Following that up, I'm having a special release brew from Willington Brewing called Pandemonium. It has a bunch of pandas dancing around the bottom of the can, which is great. It is a triple dry hopped hazy imperial IPA, Galaxy Vic Secret, and I haven't tried it yet, but oh, she fine. That's good. Fuck, that's like perfect. A perfect palate. You wouldn't expect that to be. It's probably just because of the blend of hops and the dry hopping process in general, but like you wouldn't expect it to only be dry hops, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
So before we talk about the chapters, PJ, how'd you feel about this week's reading and switching it up into Mistborn Era 2?
There is so much I absolutely love about Era 2 over Era 1. The abilities are amazing. The setting's amazing. Like almost entirely, I love this book more than the entire first trilogy already. somehow. Because I really liked the first trilogy. And I think that was kind of apparent in our coverage. My one hesitation on that is it feels less hard as far as like, here I go again. As far as rules go, it feels like the abilities are a little bit softer in definition. And I don't doubt that there are rules behind them, but it feels like a lot of the abilities that we've been exposed to operate in a much less grounded way.
Interesting. Okay. So here's where I differ with that opinion a bit. Of course, I've read the whole fucking thing, so like you have to take what I say with a little bit of a grain of salt. But I think there's a lot of growth that happens for Brandon as a writer between the end of Era 1 and him beginning Era 2. So in between books here, Brandon Sanderson published The Gathering of Storm, which is the first of his 3 Wheel of Time books to wrap up the series for Robert Jordan. And then he published a year later The Towers of Midnight, which was the second one. So it's two massive books with a ton of pressure on them and a ton of research that had to be done, and switching worlds and switching ideas and styles and thinking about writing in a very different fashion, entering one of his favorite worlds, right? And then in 2013, he finishes up A Memory of Light. Between then, he publishes The Way of Kings, the first book in the Stormlight Archive, and this book, in addition to a couple of other books, Warbreaker as well, all of which I think changed Brandon Sanderson's writing approach from one that was so reliant upon exposition to explain things through a character's head and like really heavy info dumps that we kind of just get used to inside of Mistborn Era 1, as opposed to really a shift from telling to showing. As we kind of got into like the details in the last book, and we had talked about it a lot, like a lot of hemalurgy is explained through the logbook, which is purely exposition. It is not plot-driven writing. And so we're reliant upon that text, basically, in order to even understand some of the things, because the text itself doesn't show through action or explain through action how things work effectively. And so I think he learned across the course of those books how to write magic differently and better while still adhering to his own magic rules.
Okay.
That's the gist. And I think that it's easy enough to explain that he wrote 1, 2, 3, 4 hard adult books between point A and point B as like a point to being like, that's a lot of shit that he wrote, like almost 1 million words between series. Actually, I think it's more than 1 million words.
Yeah. The story definitely has a driving force to it that we didn't quite have in Mistborn Era 1. Can't argue with that. Yeah.
But I
believe you. I know we're talking about like 2 different things though.
Well, no, but I think that's your point on not being as rules heavy is because you realize that he has to keep the action going and that the action can show the rules. And it's a matter of people trusting him enough that the rules are going to come, or that they'll happen, or that you'll occur and you'll get situations, and working it out. Like that's, I don't mean to sound so condescending to Era 1, but like that's how writing works most of the time with most people. That's how most authors function, is they aren't going to just sit and hand you like a pre-read book or like a read-along guide book to like understand something, as opposed to exposing you to it naturally, which is kind of what Brandon did in the original Mistborn era. I like the logbooks for some of what they do, but it is so clear when you get to this book and the Stormlight Archive and everything else that while a great story, a great plot. This is why, as we talked about in the wrap-ups, I had more issues than expected, because like that had fallen out of my mind because of all of the good Sanderson writing that I had read, and it really reared its ugly head when I went back to, at the very least, the last 2 books. Not the last 2 books, the last book for me. But
yeah,
I understand what you're saying, that you think the rules are whimy, limey, not defined, but they will be.
I believe that.
Yeah,
I totally believe that. Yeah, that's just how they come across right away. And like you gotta understand, I'm coming from that very well defined space to something entirely less defined with new abilities.
Oh yeah.
So
right. Yeah, and I'm not by no means am I trying to talk down, but I do want to, at the very least, arm us to be successful to talk about the rest of this, because I think it's from here on out, it's better. It's different and better.
All right.
So I'm very stoked to talk about the rest of these. And, you know, we're in a new world. We're in a Western world.
Yeah.
So
I'm so in. I'm so
dude,
psyched. I'm so in on this.
I love this setting so much. So with that, let's get into our breakdown here so that we can talk about this a little bit more. Let's start with the prologue. We open up this week to a much different world, and what I think is Brandon's strongest openings that we've read so far between Elantris and the 3 other books. I think that this is the strongest punch that he sets us up with. It sets the stage for a new sort of story, a kind of magical Western. And this opening really eloquently throws us back into the world of Scadrial, while also updating some of the things and reminding us quickly without ever becoming wordy about the rules of the world, kind of like we were saying before. I think it's brilliantly executed. It shows, if we look to like Mistborn, I don't want to spend too much time comparing the eras so much, but you look to like the scenes that we talked about in the beginning of the novels when he was introducing the magic system, and how it would take like 50 pages or like a battle of 10 pages for him to go through each of the magic from each Mistborn so that he would reset the status quo in your head of all of the abilities inside of those scenes. And here he does it in a couple of lines while setting the settings brilliantly without wasting our time and reiterating things.
I hear you. I loved those descriptions. I really did. I really loved them.
Boo this man.
But we're operating in the same universe, so we don't need them here.
This is like an elevated execution of that. The fact that he doesn't have to write out a paragraph. But what I'm saying is, like, regardless of like our understanding, he explains the same ability in a sentence. Like, he has just become a much more capable, denser writer. He explains how the lines flare out from the center and the blue lines are pulled, and then quickly explains how he pushes against things, and then also explains a brand new ability in the form of a steel bubble. You know, like, he does all of these things just lightning fast.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. I don't know. I'm not disagreeing with you. All I'm saying is I really liked those long drawn out, very detailed, granular descriptions of things.
Okay.
I can like both.
You are allowed to like what you like, so I'm not gonna boo-hoo you too much. But at the same time,
it's okay to be wrong.
Oh my God.
Immortal words of Kross.
I would say that. I try very hard to not. I'm trying harder, I should say, to not allow people to like things.
Do you remember me drooling over those like long sections of that book?
I do, and I'm not saying that, like, I'm not talking about the combat specifically, but I'm talking about the intros that we talked about being like chunky and really just used to like reiterate and like redo this, right? This is just an example of how redoing that can be done in a simple flourish rather than, you know, meticulously to give us all 16 powers in a single scene, you know. Not really, but you get the gist of what my hyperbole.
I get it. It's fine.
What do you think about the world?
The world is awesome. The world makes a ton of sense for these powers. This Western sort of feel. It is exactly what I would imagine a playground for these powers to like be within. Like it's fast paced, it's gritty, it's varied, and it's just a blast so far. A blast in multiple ways.
Shotgun Ka-chow. Blasts aplenty. That was the sound of finger guns going off, folks. If your finger guns don't make noises, they aren't real.
Yeah, exactly.
And with that Western spirit, though, comes something new thrown into the mix. Guns. Bullets whizzing by, we find out that our first POV character, Waxilium Ladrian, wielding a Starion, takes out a guard and does so all while burning steel. Branderson highlights a couple of things here between the ability to create a steel bubble, like we were talking about, and using specific metal bullets and casings to help increase his capabilities as a wielder of steel, and how almost X-ray vision like the steel lines can be in these moments. What'd you think about this?
So this... For me, my initial reaction to this was much like what you were talking about before, in that this is a reiteration of different rules, but with a twist and with a flourish. So like we saw the X-ray kind of idea of steel and iron in Era 1, but it definitely took a little bit more describing in order to get that imagery to come through. Where does he use X-ray as a term in this book?
I don't think so. No.
Okay. I don't know. Somehow this fresh description of the same ability feels familiar but different enough that it matches the setting, and it just feels fresh and good.
Yeah, I think that I was thinking about this while you were talking a little bit and kind of trying to clarify the line a little bit clearer even to what we were saying a little bit before, that I think we get, this is kind of the highlight of what I'm saying, right? One of the biggest things that I think Era 1 did is it pointed out how things were being done, not... Allomancy feels in Wax's hands, in Branderson's hands through Wax, feels like a tool that he's using, that he's wielding to its most efficiency. And we see it more as a tool rather than, I feel like the way that it was described in Mistborn was more like a reason that things got done, if that makes sense. Like this is how this all works. This is why this coin flies this direction. Because I push on it with steel, it does this. So because of X, Y happens. And a lot of it was like reaction writing in that way, where it's like, okay, this happens, burns, and then this happens. Versus here, it's like, okay, I've got to drop my bullet, and then I've got to push against it so that I can jet up into the air. But you don't get the burns iron, so then he pushes against the bullet and it hits the ground and reflects his weight up into the air all the time. You do get it the first time so that you understand, but almost never again does he retread those descriptions. So
I want more of it, though. I do love the way that he writes those things because it's so technical. And it's so very clearly like instant by instant thought out, and there's meticulousness across the entire thing.
This is just as thought out. It's just not as wordy. Like there's eloquence in being able to describe something simply, right?
Yeah.
Like you and I always aim to get these episodes shorter, but pack the same punch, right? Like that's our goal, is to shrink things to make it better and more punchy. And I don't think that it's any different when you think about writing. Like it's the same idea. And the fact that he manages to tell, we're not anywhere near the end of the book yet, but like that's 60,000 words compared to 220,000 words or 240,000 words. And we're a third of the way through the book at this point, basically a full part. It feels like he's told twice the story in some capacities.
That's totally true. I will entirely believe you, like agree with you on that. All I'm saying is that even though the end result is the same, I got a ton of enjoyment off of seeing that instant by instant replay of how things happened throughout that moment.
Yeah, and I'm not completely talking down about this. I'm saying that I think that this is a net improvement, and it feeds over into a lot of the other things. Because Mistborn is already so fleshed out, it really doesn't need all of that description all the time. That's the other thing, is more confidence in readers and understanding that people can go to a wiki now to like look up information if they need to, and can like find resources and other ways to help themselves out and understand things. It's kind of a newfangled thing that wasn't really, like we were saying when we were talking about publishing before. This was published in 2013. The first book that we read in the series was 2007. So big gaps there. In terms of technology and time. That's us before high school and us after high school. So yeah, in terms of timing. There we go. Oh, officially dated ourselves on the show. Yeah, it's true. It's true. We have.
I turn 28 tomorrow.
You do turn 28 tomorrow. Congrats. You've finally caught up to me again. We'll do this rat race again next year. Do it every year. But I love Wax, right? Like Wax is so great. Wax is frantically hunting around the room, and he hears a loud thump of a body of a man above him, as he's flipped out this shell and like used it. Also, can I say, while we've traded some of the meticulous explainers behind Allomancy away, him explaining why the bullets were different in his guns was super cool. Like the reason that the casings were changed so that it would actually be possible to shove something at a reasonable speed and or be able to like further influence a bullet using steel, and so having it be a heavier bullet so he could push it and do more with it even if it's propelled slower. Like that's cool.
That is cool.
That's some cool science. That's like some real sciencey shit in a different way.
That's pretty fucking dope.
It's pretty fucking dope. It's pretty sweet. Okay. Anyway, getting back to it. You know, he's frantically hunting from room to room to room, and the man that is seemingly hunting him around thuds to the ground, and we're introduced to Lessie. As we know, Lessie is not long for this world. We'll get back to her in a minute, though. I love the attention that's paid here, though, to the letter that's in Wax's pocket. It's him, like, ignoring this legacy clearly from the beginning and ignoring what he was born with so that he could become something else of his own accord. I just kind of wanted to pick your brain on the thoughts here, as this prologue sets up a lot of the thematic things that we saw over the course of the first third here and really kind of kicks us off. What'd you make of the letter, as it were?
So, I mean, that letter, that of his sort of, it's calling his lineage home to like take care of this estate, essentially. And that is the fact that he's just kind of ignoring it and it's just kind of stuffed in his pocket is a personality trait that sticks through the rest of the story so far. And it gives Wax this really great consistency as a character of somebody who doesn't like, he knows what he wants and he will follow through with like honor, and maybe honor is not the right term, but with responsibility. But he's still going to primarily focus on what he thinks is right. So, I mean, it's how would you put this in, like, we like to put D&D alignment into our characters historically. I think this puts him in like lawful neutral kind of.
I think he's pretty lawful good, right? Like he's pretty unambiguously a good guy.
Neutral good.
Neutral good, yeah.
Neutral good makes more
lawful,
sense.
But yeah.
He follows a code, but that code isn't necessarily the law.
It bends, you know. It bends. Yeah. I would go so far as to step back a second and say that it's almost like he's more thinking about D&D again, thinking about backgrounds, right? Like he is a reluctant noble of sorts. He is he was born into wealth, but didn't really want it and kind of rejected it. And so that makes for a very interesting case that we're going to talk about for the rest of the week as he reapproaches it, because he feels a deep responsibility still to all of the people that are in the employ and to legacy at large.
Yeah, he doesn't reject it to the point where he ignores that letter, for example.
No, right. Yeah.
So reluctant makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the idea of the reluctant nobles. To me are some of the coolest characters. We've talked a little bit about, like offline, we've talked a little bit about Critical Role, right? Like part of the joy of Dorian Storm's character is that he is like a reluctant noble. But yeah, so yeah, that's not very spoilery at all. So no one
it's
will care.
Not in the slightest.
Yeah, no. All right. I like the use of rust and ruined used here as a simple swear in place of Lord Ruler, as well as harmony, and shows us that we haven't moved too far away from our origin point, that religion still plays like this large focus in this story, and kind of the overall, you know, like the idea of rust and ruin feels very directly attached to, you know, the idea of harmony at some point along the line. And, you know, I guess we haven't heard like by preservation's beams or something like that, but, you know, preservation's jams. I don't know. What do you want from me?
I mean, like, harmony is so clearly Sazed throughout this entire section. Like, it's hard to... I know it's not confirmed, so you won't tell me, but it feels super obvious that this is Sazed they're talking about. Unless it's
Michelle
talking about
and I both said harmony twice in the episode, so like we fucking confirmed it on accident, but like it's not crazy to make.
No, it seems
barely
obvious.
a leap. It is barely a leap. Yeah.
Unless it's the harmony from Red Rising.
It is not that harmony, unfortunately.
Okay, because that would be a wild crossover.
Here's big, man.
But is rust always used as a proper noun? Because I think it's always at the beginning of a sentence, so it's always capitalized. But I don't know if it's just the alliteration, and it's talking about ruin, capitalized also always. But I don't know if rust is supposed to be a proper noun or if it's just the beginning of the saying.
I think it's the beginning of the saying, and then it's often capitalized as such, in a similar way that like Jesus Christ is a swear would be, even though it's like proper noun, like it's a proper noun front to back. I feel like it creates some parallelism. It's likely an editing choice more than anything else.
I don't know if it ever comes up in a situation where it's not the beginning of a sentence.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
But that's neither here nor there.
I'm searching through the whole text just to see here. So, okay, there is an instance where it is capitalized outside of being the beginning of a sentence. But inside of this book, that only happens one time. So like every other time it's the front of the sentence. That's very funny to me, but useful to know.
Useful to know. Is that in this section?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Cool.
My point was less that this is very clearly meant to be a swear. And, it's not like something that you can investigate or anything like that. Or I don't think that there's...
I don't capitalize fuck when I talk.
Or when I write. Fuck when I talk. Yeah.
I mean, I do in inflection, but anyway. Like, it's neither here nor there. I was just like, is there a Rust character that we're meant to, like, follow up on? That's another kind of nefarious deal. But... it seems more alliteration and emphasis than anything else.
I think so. I think that's what they're leaning into more than anything else. I would agree. Yeah. I just I appreciate the kind of idea. I mean, like I said, preservations jams or something like that. Preservations. I mean, you don't want to say preserves because that's just stupid, but,
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Preservations jellies.
Preservations jellies, yeah. By preservations jellies, you will leave me alone. I don't know. Jellies feels like it has so many contexts to it here that I don't even know where to go.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So after a brief interlude, checking out our friends of whom over at Hill Reaper, of whom are now doing Can I talk? The point being, if you're listening to this, we drank a little bit on the in-between because we were watching Hill Reaper's new live stream Behind the Veil that they do every other Monday with their new episode releases. Be sure to go check it out. They do great stuff.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, it was great.
I have a feeling we're going to hang out in there quite a bit, probably.
Mayhaps we will, as it goes. That said, as mentioned, I finished my cocktail and made an old fashioned to back it up with one of these syrups, and it's pretty tasty.
Nice. I finished my cocktail and grabbed another beer for when I inevitably finish this one.
Oh, I also grabbed another beer. I'm not even talking about the other beer that I grabbed. This one's called Dance Juice by Fanta Flora.
I've got Swing Juice.
Oh, no way. That's so funny. But it's like dance, like the literal dance steps. That's funny because yours looks like an electronic, like an EDM dance.
It's a golf ball.
Oh, it's a golf ball? Oh, it is a golf ball. Okay. I was just seeing like it almost looked like sound waves bouncing off the edges because of the light and everything else.
No, it's a golf ball with a neon splatter.
Okay. This is an unfiltered double IPA fermented with local peaches and dry hopped with Eldorado, Mosaic, Motica, and Sabro Cryo hops. All right, getting back to it here. We learn a bit more about who they're hunting. Bloody Tan, a serial killer of whom has been, as we find out, collecting these mummified corpses as trophies of his well-won spoils. He makes for a very haunting villain to start off the story, and one I think that is even... dare I say it, a better villain than anyone else inside of the other pages previously, inside of a fucking quarter of a second, because scene setting is real. Anyway, okay. Clearly exposing us to the fact that out in the roughs, there's some intense shit going on.
Yeah. It's good to remember that, I think, going forward within this section, because we get this exposure to the horrors of the roughs. But then we're in Ellendale, and we get these comments conflating the number of lawmen to the safety of the given citizens within the roughs. And it's definitely a matter of looking at statistics versus looking at how things actually are where they're at. And this is a very good grounding measure to understanding what life is like out there and the dangers that you face, as opposed to just the mundane life in the city, and even how small, relatively, dangers can be equated to something as horrible as something out there without totally understanding where they're coming from. Does that make sense? Am I floundering a little bit in my description?
No. I understand where you're going for. So, like, the need of lawmen in those situations are very different than one another. Like, the need for lawmen in Ellendale is for predominantly petty crimes, wherein there's something more extreme about what's necessary out in the roughs.
Yeah, and crowd control and whatever else you want to make of it. But the idea that you have twice the number of lawmen per capita essentially means that it's safer is a complete fabrication of the truth of things. But that comes up later, but this is the perfect time to bring it up, I think, because this is an example and this is our grounding in that sense of what it's actually like out there, or what it can be like out there.
Yeah, definitely. It begins to set what we assume is maybe a floor, when in reality it might be a ceiling. Like it tries to establish a range for us to understand crime, and we get that exposited upon further deeper in the story, right? We get a deeper understanding of to the extent that these things are happening. So it grounds us a little bit in a horrifyingly tense way.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Because Bloody Tan, like walking through Bloody Tan's lair, despite the prologue being very short, is pretty fantastically written little segment again. Like I said, this is definitely the best start to any of the books that we've read so far as a first chapter goes. But it's truly haunting.
It is.
Yeah,
for sure.
The prologue ends with a very strong moment here that I want to talk about. Pulling a familiar trick, something goes tragically wrong, and I'm going to read this to the best of my ability, of course. Wax fired. In that instant, Tan yanked Lessie right. The shot broke the air, echoing against clay bricks. Lessie's head jerked back as Wax's bullet took her just above the right eye. Blood sprayed against the clay wall behind her. She crumpled. Wax stood frozen, horrified. No, that isn't the way. It can't. The best performances, Tan said, smiling down and looking at Lessie's figure, are those that can only be performed once. Wax shot him in the head. And just as soon as she's introduced, Lessie is out of the story, and Wax is immediately traumatized before we even really get onto the pages here proper.
Yeah. The more I've read through this, the more it seems to me that Bloody Tan was a seer, maybe with very, very little amounts of allomancy, or not allomancy, of him to use. But that seemed like a move that was very much intentional and not by chance.
So, no. And I only mean that I only mean this in the strictest sense. The only way that the ending for the Hero of Ages works is if all of the atium was consumed, because he does not have a body to pull power from. And so seers don't exist because atium doesn't exist unless Harmony creates it and populates it some.
Good to know.
So that's more a clarification than anything else, because that's the way the story at the very end paints it. Because there isn't any more atium. It isn't regrowing because Ruin doesn't exist in the same way anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. I don't know.
There goes my theory on it, though. So
I know. So now you got to pitch something else.
Didn't it seem like so well planned, though? Like almost too well planned and almost too well executed?
I mean, perhaps, and I don't want to speak necessarily, like, speculation is good in these cases, right? Like, I think it could have been well planned. I think that as we find out later, Wax is relatively well known from out in the roughs, as we learn. Like, he's a case study to some degree of a lawman. So it's not, I don't think it's so far of a stretch to say that, like, his story spreads, and that, especially among a criminal element, it could be possible that story would spread as well.
Right. But we also know, yep, you're right.
Sometimes I hate it when you say that in this context.
We know that from the book's context, most of the specifics are lost because the person that they're acting with dies. So there's not a lot of like witnesses to their actual like operation. They know the outcome. They know the people that go up against them and that die and how they go about maybe the planning phase, but they don't know the like actual interaction with them. So to know how he shoots isn't necessarily something that's going to be well known because there's not witnesses explicitly.
Yeah, provided that the trick has been pulled enough. I do agree with you. Before even getting to that point, I did want to posit that it is possible. Well, I discounted the seer idea. It is possible that he can burn Electrum and he could see himself getting shot and could have dodged.
Fair.
By all means. So I didn't want to... I was going down on the seer thing because of Atium specifically, but I think Electrum is also possible.
There's Electrum. What does Malatium do again?
Well, Malatium is an alloy of Atium. So
I know, but it still existed, and there could be stores of it.
Well, it's still Atium, though, and that's important to the... Yeah.
Not if it was created before.
No, it abides by that same rule.
What same rule?
Yep. So
they couldn't have just turned it all into Malatium and been fine.
Correct. Yep.
That's been clarified.
Malatium would still be Rune's body.
Okay.
Or at least part Rune's body.
I know you had written that as something to ask for clarification on. I don't know if that was new information that you gained or what, but
it feels very clear given kind of the way that the rest of the that's not the explanation here. I'll just go ahead. This is part of the reason that it can make this story very hard is because it does feel like you have scientific puzzle pieces almost that to talk about it, to question it, and to have conversations about it is either to go act like an idiot for 36 weeks until we get to the end of something, or and then be like, yeah, no, I knew, I just couldn't fucking... It's different when it's for whatever reason, it feels very different when it's character drama or when it's something factual that feels like a basis for something. So Malatium wouldn't do it anyway, regardless. I think we can debunk this just on the general idea. Either who another person was in the past or who they could have been if they made different choices. It's another person, so you'd be seeing someone else.
Okay, gotcha.
By burning Malatium. You would also likely have to be
similar.
Gold you only see, because this is a mixing of gold and Atium. You see who you could have been in the past had you made different choices.
Okay. And see who someone else could have been.
No, just you. Malatium lets you see other people.
I mean, so what did Vin burn when she saw the Lord Ruler?
That was Malatium. It was the 11th metal.
Oh,
so she burned it so she could see someone else's gold shadow, basically.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
So it's like she's seeing what gold burning the
For
Lord
some
Ruler
reason,
would
I
have
thought
seen.
she was burning gold when she saw that.
No, she burns gold on herself in order to make out some details. Yeah.
Cool.
Rules. Funky rules. But Leslie's dead. Did you have anything on Leslie?
I mean, she has a whole lot of impact later.
Yeah. This is...
But we really don't know her.
I mean, it's a fair point. It's tough for me to work this out, but in my own writing, I've often thought about... So it's a colloquialism to some degree to introduce a term here, fridging, right? Fridging is the idea of introducing a female character and then killing them almost immediately to derive an emotional impact for a man to then go on through their story.
That emotion is entirely derived from the constant reminders of it throughout the rest of the story.
Sure.
Immediately, not really, because we don't know anyone.
Fair point. And that's also why fridging is ineffective, because you have to build up to know someone in order to kill them. All right, cool. With that, we go into chapter 1. We, as quickly as we start to set down our roots in the Western element, we jump forward 5 months and find Wax now in the city of Elendel, seemingly having answered the call of the letter from the prologue and referred to as Lord Waxilium and Ladrian, of which we know he doesn't particularly appreciate sort of the way that he's referred to. Of course, something we haven't mentioned, the last name Ladrian is Breeze, and that means he's a descendant of Breeze.
Yeah, fucking, I can only assume Alrahan's still kicking around in the old
gene pool,
ancestry tree.
Yeah.
Man, I didn't want that to happen.
Fuck you. Wax seeks escape and comfort, and he steps out onto the balcony of the city to breathe again and walks outside and feels the faint wetness of the mists on his face. He stares out over the metropolis and feels out of place here as the head of this house in this moment.
So a couple things. First of all, I can't quite place my finger on why, but this scene feels so perfectly Mistborn while still feeling wholly unique. Like, just compared to the first era. I don't know. It still feels, it does a great job of feeling like we're in the same universe, but also starting a new story. And it's exactly what we're doing, but this encapsulated that perfectly for me. That said, the mists have never been described as having any sort of moisture to them before. So is this something new? Is it just fog? Is it foggy and they have stories of the mists and that's why they're not super consistent?
Is it that Brandon got better at describing things and the way that things touch skin and the way that, you feel feelings?
Having moisture would require it to interact with light, and interacting with light would make it impossible to see through even with tin. The fact that it doesn't have moisture is the reason why tin works.
Yes.
And now it's wet. Okay, cool.
No, I don't mean this in in any kind of, this is one of those things that feels very, not even like it's hard to answer because there's some spoiler behind the window, right? If that makes sense. It's one of those things where, to me, this feels like growing as a writer more than it does, kind of anything else. And not that, imagine, if you will, a Mistborn in which all of the mists also made you very damp gently as you walked through them. And your whisk cloak was just drenched and you were very wet all of the time. And you would land, and instead of being light and feathery, you'd be plop. Yeah, a wet plop sound every time you landed anywhere. The Misko tails would not be stealthy. Actually, they would be bad. Yeah, as they clapped against each other in the wind.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely understand what you're saying. It does maybe in that realm point, but this also, again, to me, shows that Brandon grew as a writer because he can describe a feeling.
Yeah, but that feeling goes against the entire point.
A texture, bro. No, this is what I'm saying. Does it, though? Does it actually go against it?
Does it? That's a good question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think it. Yeah, that's the real question at the heart of what you were asking: is does it go against?
Are these mists actually the mist, or is it just fog?
Or is it just something that's a simple fog?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. That's the heart of the question. So I was trying to go forward to go back to get back here. So yeah. I do agree with you, though. It does feel perfectly Mistborn-y. It has this sort of, I mean, I already used the word texture to describe it, but it does feel distinctly just launching out into the fog, into the city. Feels very reminiscent of our experiences all the way back in the Final Empire.
Mm-hmm.
We do get a bit of cheese, though, of course, because Brandon can't help himself in certain moments, as the names of the streets, mansions, promenades, and parkways seem to have all been named as nods to the old crew, as they made it possible for this new world to exist. He stares out over the metropolis and says that it was designed by Harmony himself. There's lots of fingerprints of our godly boy lingering around in this new world. What'd you make of kind of the scene setting of our dear city of Ellendale, as it were?
I mean, cheese is absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And having Sazed's
cheese, man.
It's terrible. It's terrible cheese. Do not eat much of it. You can handle it a little bit, but if you have too much, your body just preserves itself and then you can't die, which maybe that's okay.
Like the man under the bridge,
Yeah. Had too much spray cheese. It's good to see Sazed's hand every once in a while. Feels good. The name Harmony, I can only imagine, it seems so very Sazed quote unquote. Like, it feels like something he would bestow upon himself. But at the same time, he is so true to himself that I could absolutely believe somebody would look upon his story and then call him Harmony based on that. So I'd like to get some background on that, where that name came from.
It is interesting to make the move between a story that had elevated itself near the end of the first era to this really big godly context, right? That it really, like, I don't think it actually jumped the shark or jumped the moon or anything like that, but it did stretch itself in a very cosmic sense. And then to be pulled back down to the ground again through Axe's story, I think is really well executed. And I think it does leave a lot of these questions, which now that we've been teased with this sort of like godly existence and godly worlds, you know, you're clipping after the answers. You're like, dear God, I know there's something else. Give me another hit of that.
Mm-hmm.
Which is something that I appreciate about the story. Yeah, it's a great question. Does this originate from Sazed, or does this originate from nomenclature as people have created their colloquialisms over the last 300 years?
Yeah.
After contemplating what he should do for the better mend, the two parts of him, that of the roughs and that of what is expected of him as a house leader, Wax handles his Starians, thinking about replacing them before launching out into the night and dropping into the coachman's yard, carefully floating his way down by storing his weight. Wax is something new to us. He is a twin-born. We find out a couple of other things, of course. We've learned about fairings officially pretty early on. We also learned that Mistborn don't exist in the current state of the world as we collectively knew them.
I am so here for this combination. And for this new set of abilities, not set, but combination, like the ability to how do I describe this? This new lexicon of combinations of abilities, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess that would be the best way to describe it. It just feels really good to be able to combine ferochemical and elementic abilities on a very limited scale like we see here, because there's so much potential for different powers and different very unique and creative ways of using these abilities in conjunction with each other. And that gets even more complicated when you introduce the fact that these abilities can affect other people and that they can pair off with one another like Wax and Wayne do going forward. So you effectively have 4 abilities, 2 that interact with it makes for complications that are still very, very powerful, but don't just lean on the I can do everything, I'm Superman, Mistborn capabilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's more dynamic, I think, than anything else. Even in Brandon's own rules of magic, restrictions are more interesting than the opposite. And so this is a great example of when you pull it back, it's actually more than it is, because you have to think of creative ways to use it. Again, we've gone back so many times to the D&D comparison here, but part of the joy of like really playing D&D effectively is figuring out how to bend the rules of something as closely as it's described as you can, and then like manipulating it so the DM's like, yeah, no, I couldn't have imagined it being done that way until you said it. I get it. Here you go. Here's a reward for doing that. And that's kind of what this feels like in a lot of different ways, is like naturally like a steel bubble isn't something that Vin would have thought of, because Vin, and I think this is well enough explained through context that we get through the idea of both savantism in the form of spook and then also the refinement that we get in the beginning of the Final Empire. Each of the Mistings were the best people at their individual abilities possible and had refined it to such a point. And Vin, while very good at all of them, likely the best Mistborn ever, especially since there aren't any more, did not have the same level of mastery, and so may not have even gotten to this point of experimentation, because she had to deal with all of them and so many other things.
Yeah, she's
jack of all trades, kind of, you know, master,
but kind of also the master of a lot of them.
Master of several, yeah. But she never got to the point of, just as a comparison point, she never got quite to the point of like Kelsier, where in that original Final Empire combat, he's using iron and steel so effectively that he's creating like a whirlwind of weapons as he's like pulled and like manipulated those metals. And as he's jumping around, like swirling metal bits around in the center to like really kind of hit people like a tornado almost.
Is he ever described as having earrings?
No, he does not have any piercings.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, Twinborn, so fucking cool. This gets into an idea too that was just surface level explored inside of Era 1, which is the idea of compounding and using the combination of feruchemy and allomancy together to like really create strong effects, which is super cool. I mean, the only real conversation that we had about compounding in the previous series was that of gold and the ability to prolong life indefinitely, right, between feruchemy and allomancy and hemalurgy.
And that was, I mean, it talked about healing kind of, but it was more talking about combating aging, which when you boil it down is kind of the same thing, but
yeah, he was also storing age, which is a little bit of a different component. So it was a combination, because he had access to all of them in theory, he was able to compound a lot of things to make a lot more than even what any of our Twinborn can do happen.
Mm-hmm.
In theory, the Lord Ruler was incredibly fucking powerful and definitely only defeated by the power of a god.
Yep.
The same power that he once held, which is just, that fucks me up in the head a little bit. But I like crazy. As I reflect on Mistborn, I like to kind of treat it like I like to think it in like a more abstract context, like a mythology of sorts. And I try not to nitpick so much on the details, because like, here's the myth. And now we've got like more things, because that's kind of what Mistborn Era 1 is as we move into these additional eras at this point. Is it's like, that's our founding myth. And now we've got 3 more time frames that we're going to look at, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting from like a universe world perspective.
Right.
I read that one. I love the little notes here that we get throughout the chapter about Wax. The notes about all the combinations that we talked about the survivor, the mist coat instead of the mist cloak, the lack of mythological Mistborn in our present day story, the ascendant warrior capitalized, and how the genealogy has shifted over these decades and generations, these centuries. On top of that, Wax realizes that all the Mistborn are missing out, that all of them were totally missing out, and that they should have been taking their metal flakes with whiskey, baby. Boom. It's so clear when he's chatting about this too, how much more dynamic Brandon's writing has gotten since the end of Era 1, even in the midst of exposition. You know, you get these like nice flashy character moments like this comment about Mistborn. Cheers, by the way, of course, drinking to the whiskey, but I had forgotten about that little bit. Wax, man, every time I reread this, Wax becomes one of my favorite characters, probably in the eras, but
yeah,
damn.
He's pretty great.
He's pretty cool. Like, yeah.
Like, there's this sense that I'm tempted to say, but hear me out, I guess. The characters and the first books in general don't feel unrefined, but in comparison, this section just blows it out of the water.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what you've been saying for the last hour. But yeah, like this is a better written book already.
Right. Well, and it's so tough because it's like when you're in it, Mistborn has great hooks. Era 1 has great hooks that like really get into you. And I think that our primary POV characters really get those hooks in really effectively. And they do bring us through the story to, I think, an engaging conclusion. I also think it's well constructed, but you can still build a skeleton for a house and it might not be flashy or like what you like exactly. And I think that's what I find with Era 1 more or less, is like it's got great bones, but I don't love the architecture.
Fair.
So that said, I still like it. Like, again, that's comparing it against some of my favorites. Like that's trying to rank it, I guess, in things that I've read previously, not like what we've tried to do, especially in our analysis and approach, is keep the comparison separate to the series. However, we're still in the fucking series, so all gloves are off. It's just a new era, baby. So our hero lands, of course, and quickly finds himself ducking and hiding amidst a firefight. He creates a steel bubble, basically lightly pushing in all directions using steel, preparing for a new blue line to crop up. 4 different figures continue to shoot at him, and he appears... And when he hears a scream that freezes him, it reminds him of Leslie's blood splattered on the wall. Our boy seems to be dealing with a little bit of PTSD.
All right, slow down.
Fuck you.
I'm amped about these characters.
My boy. Fine. My boy.
Yeah, I don't know if he's earned our boy yet. Like you can't just throw that term out willy-nilly. We gotta get more. We gotta get more.
My boy Wax. That's fair. That's a fair point. Oh man.
I do have a good feeling about him. He'll earn it. He'll get there.
He does maybe need to do something. So we'll see what happens, of course. But
you have future sight.
I am effectively a seer for this series. I can kind of, see that. I've got my infinite supply of Atium because
you own the other books.
That was exactly what I was going to say. Not some weird shit about me being a Zerg Queen and my back abdomen being the Atium mines of Hath-Sin attached via sinew and gross fluid. Yeah, no, that definitely wasn't the joke that I was going to make.
Gross.
I was in the process of making it, and then you cut me off, and you had a better comment, but I had to have you hear it. My God, we are going into chapter 2 here, baby, in just a second. We aren't even done with chapter 1. Baby. All right. We move to Wax arriving at home in the Ladrian mansion, and we're introduced... I heard myself say mansion and then try to cut it off real quickly in mansion, and there's no way that's coming out in the edit. We move to Wax arriving at home in the Ladrian mansion, and we're introduced... Can I say mansion right?
Mansion.
We move to Wax arriving at home in the Ladrian mansion, and we're introduced to the house butler. Is it Tilime? Tillamu? I honestly, I forget. Each time I look at this, I forget the pronunciation. The butler's name. Tillamu?
I'm not sure.
Tilime. Yeah?
Tilime sounds right.
Tilime sounds right. All right, folks. Dear God, I'm going to get it wrong for the rest of this episode. It's going to be Tilime, and the next episode, I'm going to come back with the audiobook pronunciation. And you cannot write me letters every episode. You cannot email me, send me tweets. You gotta give me just this one. I just need this one. I'll do it from here on out. Just this one time. Okay?
Nope.
Fuck.
Eviscerated.
Right. And we're introduced to the house butler. Oh my God, Tilime. And he paints a picture of the responsibilities that Wax has to the house. After all, he employs thousands, and his uncle's foolishness is what brought them here and potentially doomed them to begin with. To quote, and that is that. Wax, the lawkeeper, is gone. It was time to be Lord Waxilium Ladrian, 16th High Lord of the House Ladrian, rising in the 4th Octant of Ellendale City.
All right. That's something interesting.
You mean the development of plot that we talked about with the butler?
No, I mean the number 16.
Oh.
Which is fucking everywhere.
Go ahead. No, it's good. I'm just gripe to pick. Finish your thought.
No, that's fine. Does this count starting at Breeze as number 1? Or does it count from like his previous noble lineage?
That's a great question. I would assume so. I think that the way that I think about the way that you could get to 16 House Lords is this pass off between like uncle, cousin, having people like over 300 years. 16 doesn't feel that absurd if you hand it off at different times, I
mean, that's like one every 18 years or so.
Yeah, that sounds right.
That sounds so little,
18, but I guess that assumes that like Breeze age gaps, age ranges, people die, improve, all kinds of things. Like, I think I agree with you in concept, and you don't even need to say it. I can see it in your fucking eyes. So I'm going to repeat this so everyone can understand. PJ's beady little eyes are looking at that 16 number, and he's like, "That's a suspicious fucking number. I see that number. I see what you're looking for." Oh, octant. So we're talking about 8. So we're talking about a division of a factorial of 6 in some fashion, or 16. Excuse me,
what?
Not 6. It's not a factorial of 6. That's bullshit. I see you. I see what you're fucking doing, and I raise you a fuck, man. I don't know.
I'll take the fuck, man. What? I don't know. It's fine.
Truth be told, I think that Brandon's penchant for latching into a number is borrowed from another famous author of whom latched into a number in the context of their own very popular, very famous series. And I'm not going to spoil who.
Okay, that's fine.
Because we're going to read it eventually. But I am very confident from out of text things that it is one of a couple of things that he's borrowed from said author. So, nod.
Up until now, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with accepting that as a thing. But up until now, 16 has been explicitly, narratively, a very important number.
Oh, yes, for sure. I'm not trying to say that it was not before or anything like that.
But this just happens. It's just
trend of it being important. Yeah, especially, yes. I can, again, we talked about the sort of Cheese Whiz thing earlier, right? This is like...
He huffed the Cheese Whiz.
He did, a little bit. And... To be clear, you and I have discussed this a little bit off air, but maybe it makes sense to have this conversation before we go into chapter 2. Jesus, this book was intended to just be a one-off. When he wrote it, this was intended to be like a longer novella, basically like a novel, a full book within an era, like a time frame, and then he was going to move away from it to jump to the next era. However, he found that when he was writing it, he enjoyed the story so much and fans reacted so positively to it that he decided that he was going to write an entire unplanned story inside of this era, an entire unplanned story. So this story is book 1 and is standalone almost entirely. Not almost entirely. It's a standalone. It does connect with the next 3 books, but it like has its own plot. It has its own threads. It has everything kind of meant to be as self-contained as possible, which also means that some of this cheese, some of these like highlights were intended as like fun cheese. You know, it was meant to be kind of like a fun fucking thing. And then when he got to the end and people liked it, he was like, well, fuck, now I'm going to write more in it. And I set myself up for doom with these cheesy names and some shit. I'm not by any means, I don't think I'm treading on the whole thing, but like,
that's fine.
It's an interesting premise from a setup perspective versus like a planned trilogy versus like an unplanned tetralogy.
Is tetralogy the proper term?
It is the word. Yeah.
Okay. Good to know.
I looked it up for Red Rising's sake. Yeah.
That makes total sense. The number 16 being here as a nod to that important number without actually meaning anything makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. But maybe it means something. I don't know, PJ. I don't know. Does it not?
Maybe it means something.
Maybe I just spent a lot of time to disarm you so you wouldn't think that it meant anything, but maybe it does. I don't know.
It wouldn't be the first time you've done that.
It wouldn't be the first time that I've done that. It wouldn't be the first episode that I've done inside of this book series. It wouldn't be the first time I've done that this month. Chapter 2. Another 6 months pass after he hangs up the guns, and we find our Lord... That was really funny. I brilliantly pulled that off.
Keep playing. Keep talking.
After another 6 months pass, after he hangs up the guns, we find our High Lord Waxilium gussing himself up for a meeting. Tilame asks an interesting question about why Wax dressed like a noble when he was out in the roughs. And I think this goes to highlight how likely Wax holds his values and how he holds himself and how he thinks of himself. It's not that he has I thought about rewriting this question earlier. It's not that he's got like this massive self-important ego, right? Like he's not so self-absorbed with image, but that he has an understanding of how to value himself and how that can also put people off to help give him leverage. Sort of his presentation versus his ego are two very different things.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. But I feel like what you're describing as far as his presentation goes is his ego. You know, like I don't see the actual distinction there.
Okay. Let me clarify with a different example to like bring it back, right? If I dress up in clown makeup and show up to a podcast recording in clown makeup, you would freak out. I would know that would freak you out because you're not used to that. Right? That does not speak to my ego and sort of my self-worth and the way that I dress myself or the way that I do my attire. It only is meant to evoke a reaction in you to do so. And so out in the roughs, I think Wax is doing that because he knows that it will evoke a reaction and an intent, not that he's dressing up because he feels the need to dress himself up. He doesn't feel the need to look fancy. That's not a part of his being. That's not a part of his character. He instead has done it historically because it is disarming to people, not because it feeds some sort of self-interest or ego beast side of himself.
But disarming people does... Like, that is self-interest.
I'm trying to clarify. Self-interest might not be the right word. Like self-esteem. Self-esteem's not even the right word. It is self-interest. You're not wrong. Disarming people is still feeding your own self-interest, but that's not generally the way that ego is fed into that equation. Ego is usually something that's meant to be self-affirming, right? Something that boosts yourself up is the way that you improve your ego. He's not doing... Wax doesn't care, for the most part, about the way that other people think about him, outside of how he can use the way that people think about him to manipulate them. Like he doesn't value dressing up outside of what it's worth to piss people off or to gain an advantage or an upper hand. It's not attached to his self-esteem.
But it is attached to his self. Not his self-esteem, but to his self. And that's what ego is. I get what you're saying, and I can agree with it. Always. I completely agree with it, but to say that it's detached from his ego, I think is short-sighted a little bit. I think he's delusional about his own ego. I think much like his own paranoia.
Explore that. Yeah.
I think much like his own paranoia, he sees himself as less egotistical than he actually is, and sees himself as less paranoid than he actually is.
Agree for sure with the latter. I think I need a little bit more on the former, but okay, I can see where you're coming from for the whole point, though. So it's kind of like he's making the argument that he doesn't need to dress up this way, but at the same time, he does.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I can give that its time in the sun.
Okay.
But of course, he doesn't have that kind of leverage inside of this conversation. Going in to talk with Lord and Lady Harms, and he's walking out on the wrong foot in the first place, being told that Lady Grimes, that there has been a theft of steel again against the House Ladrian by a group called the Vanishers.
All right. Such a cool name for a thieving crew. And all this makes me think of is why did none of the thieving crews have cool names in the first book? It would have been so much better. Instead of Cayman's crew, it could have been, the Cayman Crocodiles. I don't know. They didn't explore crew names in the first book, and they should have.
It is one of many tiny details that would have just been like so fun that we're never the focus, but it does. But they
constantly popped up though, specifically Cayman's crew and the crew. Could have had a cool name because they're referenced all the time. Yeah,
I agree.
Preaching to the
question
choir.
Here, the question here is it Brandon's fault or is it the crew's fault for not?
I think it's Brandon's fault.
Name themselves. I think it's Brandon's fault.
What crew? Like what thieving crew leader doesn't also want a cool name?
And it like a cool flag or like a cool lapel pin or like something,
Colors emblem. At the very least.
Colors, yeah, right. Something to unify people. Come on. A tattoo, Every crew has a tattoo.
A brand. We'll go barbaric about it.
In some cases a brand. Yeah, like why not? We'll fucking brand them. I'll get a pylon brand right now. You want to do that right now? I got a candle. I think that gets hot enough.
Don't have a brand. It's got things to make things hot. I don't have things to make hot.
I have paper clips. I could make it work. You could make it work.
Yeah, let's fucking do it.
A third vector is introduced before he's able to meet with the Harms, though. The Harms, though. As he finds his old friend Wayne snooping around his place, having abandoned his assigned post at the back of Weathering. They're having a continuous conversation where Lord Harms walks through with his stern-looking daughter, Steris. He's grumpy and upset that he wasn't getting talked to in the time and the allotted meeting that he was meant to when Wayne unveils his particular talent, that of seemingly shape-shifting and improv acting. Of course, we learn that this is all a careful trick done by done with one of Wayne's metals, bend alloy, creating a speed bubble.
So bend alloy is a new metal. It's such a fun ability. Like, I can't complain about that. It's super cool. And the creativity that comes along with pairing these two with each other and their abilities. Like, we'll get into that later, I know. But right now, Wayne, if we're going to make an early pull for our boy, just right off the bat, it's Wayne.
You pull for Wayne as our boy?
At the moment, yeah. If we have to choose one of them, which I think we let him earn it. But our boy
Wayne.
This is that alloy. This is that metal that I was talking about, that the ability itself feels a lot less hard. And I know that those rules will come into play, and I know it'll happen, but just the fact that it is a predefined bubble makes it feel so different. It's just such a different ability compared to everything else, and it feels differently defined as well in that way. I will be satisfied with it. Like, I trust Brandon enough for that, but it feels out of place compared to the other abilities. So
can I ask?
It makes for a very
why it feels out of place to you? We get a couple of examples of it. Is kind of my.
We do get examples. But we also get so many exemptions, like not exemptions to the rule, but so many possibilities for the rules that have been placed to be broken, like not moving the bubbles, like the bubbles being stationary, and not necessarily knowing what stationary means, and if that's based on some sort of relativity, like can it happen on a train?
That's a great question, PJ.
And we know that this exists in a universe with a spinning, moving planet. So how universal is this bubble?
Those are both great questions, PJ.
We know it works on the planet, so it has to move with relativity of something. So things like that are immediately what come to mind for me. And yeah.
What's so fascinating to me... Go ahead.
No. I know those rules will come to be later, but they're so ambiguous right now. But also the distance of the bubble and the size of the barrier. I love the fact that the descriptor of the way that objects interact with the barrier is defined. I wish there was more of a definition of what happened if somebody walked out of it and how that affected them, because I would assume it would affect them in a similar way as it would a bullet. But that's getting more granular than I think we need to right now.
Perhaps, especially since we aren't even talking about the example yet. I do want to just, at the very least, at the top of this, mention that I think this is some of the danger that you can play with writing in a very hard magic system, is that a softer magic system plays mostly with the canons of probability, which is how you've set up the world, how you've designed things in general. What's the sense of mysticism? Do you understand how far things can stretch generally without understanding the rules? But when you get so granular in detail, you can lock yourself into a very strict canons of probability that makes it very hard to violate these, not violate, but to add or supplement rules without full context, because it feels like a violation of things that came before.
So give me the full context.
Right. What I'm saying is I feel like that's a danger. That's one of the dangers of hard magic systems that I don't think people talk about a whole lot. I know that you're not submersed in this culture, but as someone who is working on something and works on writing pretty consistently, I'm finding this to be a thing more and more. Is the more that you define, the more satisfying some conclusions can be to people, because it feels like it's grounded. It feels more like sci-fi than it does fantasy, because it feels like physics or chemistry or whichever way you want to equate that. It's some hard science. But you can also lock yourself into such a tight corner that any changes, adaptations, or anything that you might need to make or stretch for the story, cool boy, yeah. I mean, yep. It can lock you into a corner where all you do is you sit and you question, as opposed to, you know, like, is there fun like commentary on the general idea and practice in the whole? Is there any way in the world that you think that Brandon could answer every question and every possible conceit about allomancy, feruchemy, and hemalurgy ever across all of the novels, especially as combinations of each other. I mean, it was sort of rhetorical. I'll take your answer, though.
No, I don't necessarily need him to be able to answer every question, but I want for there to be the rules set up that don't contradict each other. And that's all I care about so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it seems to be the case so far.
Got it. Yeah. I don't think any of the rules with Bandoloi, as we've seen them so far, contradict anything else. They just stretch outside of the conventional bounds, like you were saying to begin with. The idea of a speed bubble was very different. This idea that you can pop up this like area basically where time is constrained and everything then happens all at once when it collapses, is one of the coolest, strangest forms of not time travel, but time manipulation I've seen represented in fiction. Like, this is eloquently done in a fantastic fashion, I think.
Yeah.
The idea of needing to cough on your way out of the bubble to disguise everything that happened in the middle of the bubble,
Well, there's that, but there's also the idea of somebody trying to walk out of a bubble and it being spherical, their head exits before their body. So there's a whiplash effect because their head would be out of the bubble while their body's still inside of it. So the motion doesn't happen instantaneously because there is a physical barrier that half of their body is through and half of it is not.
And that's walking through a bubble. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Entering.
We haven't seen that yet, though. Right.
No, but they've talked about it.
Right. They talked about it with bullets, which is what you were positing earlier. What would that be like with a body? I think it would be bad, per your point. Especially if you like Russian danced your way out with your feet first. It could be really bad. Your head in the bubble, because your head's where all your actions come from. It could be tragic.
Yeah, that could be really bad.
Yeah. Time dilation as you're falling. That'd be weird. That would be really weird. Not sure. Not sure. Sounds bad.
Yeah, falling into it because... Oh.
Yeah, this gets complex really quickly. We'll just let that be. Steris and Wax begin
spaghetti legs.
Yeah, this is like a wrap-up conversation for sure. Some sort of experimental, this might be a Devil's Cut question, just working out some weird physics of Bandoloi and the possibilities. Steris and Wax begin a conversation about their potential arranged marriage that veers into all sorts of topic, as well as the legalese behind the contract that will guide it. What do you think of Steris and her thoughts on marriage? And to append that, how about the religion of the path versus that of survivorists, as we understand it up until this point?
So Steris's thoughts on marriage feel so perfectly noble. In the sense of the nobles of Era 1. It being this contract for business and status, and also requiring this pageantry of love and commitment to each other. I mean, it's not a unique idea. It happens in real life. It still happens now, but more commonly happened in the past. But to have a several dozen page contract outlining every little thing is certainly extra. Regarding the religions, though, the path, I think, is pretty obviously the path of Sazed or harmony. Even if it was more ambiguous than that, if it wasn't so obvious that it was Sazed, it feels described well enough, and all the caveats and requirements and thoughts around it feel well enough described that I would say, yeah, that sounds like something Sazed would put forward. So it feels very in character there. The survivorists, however, pose an interesting question for me, because I'm still trying to figure out if this is based on the Church of the Survivor following Kelsier, or if it's based on following Spook or the Survivor of the Flames, or, as we get exposure to later, the Lord Mistborn.
And where do you think that lands?
I think it lands on Spook, but I don't have much to follow. That's just a hunch more than anything. It's not actually based on anything specific.
Well, would it be derived from his... Would it be derived based on his place in the... I understand that it's just a hunch for sure. I understand the name of the Survivor of Flames, that we're comparing that and adding that in here. I want to just address the fact that he's known as the Lord Mistborn. Do you think that they wouldn't like maybe title it after him if it was like a little bit more derived? Or do you think that they would subsume the title because it's about the two survivors? Like I want a little bit more meat on your bone there, if it makes sense.
So I feel like with the end of Era 1, we got a definitive religion. Basically. We got like, the terrorist faith was the true religion. Like we got an explicit like answer to that question, and that resolved.
Right.
So new religion, like old religions from there, can still exist, and I'm okay with that, and that'll happen, I'm sure. But I feel like most people would navigate to new unknowns. Religion is very, very good at answering unknowns and unknowables. So a new patron that isn't like adhering to previously unknown things that have become known makes sense for a start of a new religion to me.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It tracks a little bit better because it feels like anything that could have been pre the changeover of the world, like that feels like it's wiped clean by the true religion to some degree. So I can understand where you're coming from then from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
As far as the Steris and Wax relationship goes, like, come on. This is pretty...
I mean, it's pretty
weird.
Certainly weird.
It's definitely...
business.
It's definitely business. I want to say it's sterile. It's her name's Steris, right? I mean, but it is very sterile.
It is very sterile.
Yeah.
And I think that's by design. That's her intent.
Yeah, definitely. Mm. She's pushing for that. I mean, is she pushing for the... There's some nuance there that I don't necessarily want to just override by saying she's pushing for that. But like the entire concept of the contract of the whole thing and the way that it's all derived from this sort of singular religious agreement it's not fun. It's not a real relationship by any means. Not that I'm the pro in the room, Mr. Taken Man, but
we have a 50-page contract outlining all of it.
Oh, do you? Okay. I had to check if you had written the prenup yet or not. Like it was it's a necessary check here. Does that include podcast time, etc.? I'm just curious. I'm just a little. I'm not saying I'm worried, but like if you're going to negotiate,
page 17.
I negotiate contracts for work every day, and if you need a contract negotiator for our time, all I'm saying is I know a guy, and his name is me. Yeah, who better? But we get a lot more speed bubble fun to move on from the Steris Wax relationship that is very dicey, that we'll definitely return to. We get more speed bubble fun as Wax and Wayne dip in for a second to share a conversation with Marcy, the younger girl who followed into the room, and his Wax's loss of Lessie. This is clearly a point of contention between our two leads so far, as Wax has begun to move on, but Wayne is dragging him back into his old self and the mystery of what's going on therein.
This is such a clever way to go about having a private conversation in the midst of another conversation. It feels out of the box in the thinking. I wonder if this is the typical use case for it, but I'm looking for more out of the box uses of powers like this now from here on out. Like, give me cool shit.
It's true. I mean, we already got some cool shit. But I do generally...
more cool shit.
I
never be satisfied. Always be unsatisfied.
How dare you? Also, it feels... This whole book has this feeling of the Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movies to me that I just adore. And I just nailed that when we were talking about the sort of secretive and the way that this plays out in kind of these side conversations and everything like that. It feels... almost entirely like I've already got the Sherlock Holmes texture from the story because of a lot of the work that Wax does on the side. And like you get that investigative detective side of the story to some degree. But I really just nailed that Guy Ritchie sense when you brought up that idea of how cool these speed bubble conversations are. And it feels like the off camera to talk about what's going to happen and then seeing it happen kind of moments that Guy Ritchie is so well known for, even if it's just side conversations.
Yeah, I get a lot of heist movie vibes from this entire section. And like it feels backwards and like from the other point of view, like from the lawman point of view, but it's still like those vibes all the time. And I love it.
Yeah, if the first book was a heist, this is a detective breaking a crime organization, you know? These have like polar opposite origin points. So it's fun. Wax and Saris's conversation continues, but his curiosity cannot be quenched. Of course, the mysterious bullet casing that Wayne gave him is made of aluminum, as the most dangerous weapons are made so that they can't be detected or affected by allomancy. As the harms depart, Wax and Wayne begin to further unpack the mystery of these robberies, and Wayne swings a bit below the belt as he thinks that Wax has sunken beneath his moral station since dismissing his job as a lawkeeper. The chapter closes as Wayne leaves and Wax contemplates existence.
So what's interesting to me in this, one is that this never came up in the first books because we had aluminum. Never, I mean, it was rare, but it wasn't like that rare. But it was also never described as like allomantically inert, because it has allomantic traits and it can be burnt, and it has an alloy, but it's also one that's only valuable to Mistborns. But there's no other metals that are allomantic metals that can't be affected by steel or iron. So it's interesting to me as to why this is the case, because it seemed to be because it's inert. But like there are other metals that, I don't know. Why this?
Great question. Yep. I mean, to your point, it is very fascinating because it is something that almost seems to have this like unique interaction around it, which is that it's not that it's not possible to be used as an allomantic metal. It's that other metals don't react to it in the same way that every other metal reacts to every other metal, so far as we're aware. It's aluminum.
I mean, other than silver,
this, like, dodgy substance. Yeah, silver as well.
Silver, we get that in the chains that Vin was shackled to in the last book. So the idea is it's not an allomantic metal, so it can't be pushed or pulled upon. But that's how it was described. I don't know if that was textual or extra textual, but aluminum seems to fall into that category. But it is allomantic. I trust it. It'll happen. I get it. But the thoughts are there.
I'm not even... Yeah. I wasn't even trying to dissuade or like pose this as a question. It's just aluminum is an interesting thing because it belongs on the allomantic table, but at the same time, you know, it seems to... It's not that it's non-reactive entirely or like completely inert. It reacts very like the way that, like what happens when it burns. It's a zero-sum game. So
yeah. At the same time, metals, presumably, that aren't allomantic grade metals can still be affected by iron and steel. So it's not just a matter of like what's allomantic and what's not, and how does that interact with iron and steel. It's
a step beyond that.
Something entirely different. So,
yeah, definitely more than we bargained for. Just like this episode. Chap, do you have to go to the bathroom?
I've got to run, grab something from outside quick.
All good. Yep. Chapter 3. Isn't it so great that we don't have to read logbooks at the top of every chapter? I don't know if you feel that way, but oh boy, That's freeing. 8 hours later, Wax is left still contemplating, and we get more information on these roguish vanishers and their ongoing thieveries through the broadsheets. This is really interesting because we actually get a page of the broadsheet to read ourselves, and also Wax gives us some exposition that the broadsheet provides. It's really interesting to have this like in-world article of information. Very different than the books that I just slandered, the log books, to have something that just feels tangible comparatively. What'd you think?
It's super cool. I really like the inclusion of them. That said, you had mentioned to me how jarring it was to listen to the audiobook because it reads it. It did not read it for me. I don't know if it's a new edition of the audiobook or different between hostings or whatever, but it didn't read it for me. So I didn't have that experience.
It doesn't read it in this book. It reads it in all of the other ones. I forgot that it didn't do it in this one. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. I can imagine how it would be jarring.
Well, because it reads like a newsie, you know what I mean? Like it's like, la-di-da-do about Ellendale, and there's some vote XYZ, vote for freedom, vote for loyalty, vote for Veltri, or whatever it is. Like there are a lot of things that are very, I think, fantastic as far as world building go, but are really jarring when you're listening to the audiobook, where you're like, this is cool. But I'm a little concerned. Yeah. Whoa, buddy. So, yeah, no, I just really enjoy the idea that you have this like physical piece of media in the book, and then you also have this sort of, you've got this textual description of like his experience with the media and what he focuses on. I think even more specifically, it's just, you know, it's a small thing, but I think it's a cool moment. So if you know me, I'm a bit of a tea lover. I actually have tea on every single episode of the show. I drink mine already. It's sitting over there in my Iron Man cup. There. And so I love Tilmay's little conversation about making tea after Wax is like, well, tea's fucking tea. And Tilmay's like, no, tea is not tea. It's not all the same. And, you know, that he's making this tea for him to get through those notes late at night. I adore that little bit of the conversation of like spicy or sweet, or like, you know, like he's moving through all of these different notes and he's like, I'll construct the right tea for what you're looking for right now. It's just the right amount of hipster for me that I'm like super cool with it, you know?
Yeah.
As it goes. That said, moving on from the tea, Wax begins to piece things together like Charlie Day with a good old Pepe Sylvia board. He surmises that he thinks that the random crimes were less about the crimes themselves and more about the people stolen, as each were from wealthy families that likely contained an Allomancer. What'd you make of the whole thing?
First of all, do we drink for tea?
I think so. I think we drink for tea. This is so specific. Yeah. It feels like cocktails of tea. Yeah, cheers.
It does. Exactly. This is really where that sort of heist film vibe ratchets up a little bit. And it's the inverse, but it still evokes those feelings. And I really enjoyed the Pepe Sylvia board, as you called it.
I agree with you. It's so interesting because it's like contra heist. It's not like a heist film itself. It's more on the other side of that experience.
Police procedural.
Yeah.
But not quite.
Not quite. Yeah. More, and that's where I go back to like that's where I really like the Sherlock Holmes Guy Ritchie comparison, because even the Sherlock Holmes Guy Ritchie comparison still has this feeling of heistiness to it, despite it not being about Sherlock Holmes stealing things. It's about the deconstruction. Like it, to me, that is the most direct comparison and almost emulation of the story. I don't think that's something that he was latching into. I know that he said that he likes the movie, but like, I don't think that that's what he's, trying to do.
It's seeing all the pieces click into place like you do in a heist movie, but you do just the same in the Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes.
Or in, most detective. I mean, anything detectives. Like,
Yeah. It's all the same feeling. I just equate it with heist. So
agreed. Yeah, that makes sense. It all rotates around crime. So, those overlaps make sense to me as well. We also learn a lot more about Wax's past uncle Ed Warren through a little anecdote that Tilmae shares regarding his horse racing days as a gambler. And it wasn't necessarily that the gambling itself was bad, as he was good at it, but it was that his attention was divided between what he should be doing and what he was good at, maybe. I love this as a metaphor for Wax, of whom really needs to come here and pick up the house and bring it up to the standard and kind of lift it up, as opposed to letting it sink and letting all these jobs fail, and to avoid falling into the traps of doing this lawman job and doing the Pepe Sylvia job as opposed to what he should be doing. You know,
it's such a good metaphor that I wonder if it's too good of a metaphor and if it's entirely fabricated as a means of pushing Wax in the right direction.
Okay.
Maybe not entirely fabricated, but pointedly accentuated.
Sure. A little so on the nose that it's like, do you mean this for real? Yeah. Like when I'm trying to relate something directly to you, to tell you something, you know?
I don't think you ever do that.
Well, I mean, you don't fucking listen, so it doesn't matter. Yeah, no, I do get that. And that's where I think it's good, because, you know, I think Tilmae does a good job of... Tilmae as a character also dances the line of Alfred pretty firmly as far as things go. And we've been talking about a lot about detectives, and I want to get into this later, as I think the action and Wax in the moment seems to evoke almost Bruce Wayne. But Tilmae is such an interesting character because he's not quite Alfred, but he also at the same time has those kind of Alfred-esque anecdotes, excuse me, not antidotes. There's no poison here. Although maybe, you know, culture can be poison. I don't know. Something. Yeah, I don't know. I just really enjoy the way this bit overlaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
It's a good call, especially the Alfred thing makes a lot of sense. And I'm trying to think of a better comparison. One that's an advisor, but not necessarily in on it. You know?
Yeah. Right.
Whereas Alfred and like Jarvis kind of fill similar roles, but they're also in on it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is more of a spiritual role without necessarily being an active participant.
I think that Tilmae is a well-executed character because he is unassuming but knowledgeable, and we almost immediately trust, like foundationally, because of how much faith he both places in Wax, how much trust he puts into the system, and how much he evokes our understanding of like his training in almost terrorist-like behavior.
Like Sazed.
Yeah, very much.
Very much like Sazed from the first book.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And so I don't want to say we're like lulled.
Is the new hero of ages. Got it. Okay, we're cool. We got this. Let's go forward.
We get a little bit more on the path here, and I wanted to ask what your thoughts are on the earring, the prayer, and the like. Where's your head at with this religion?
You said earring really...
I moved on.
No, I know. I mean, you're good. The earring gives me really weird vibes. Obviously evoking hemalurgy and thereby ruin.
That give you weird vibes. You know what I mean?
It shouldn't, because I know contextually that ruin has been destroyed and annihilated and absorbed with preservation/Vin and harmony/Sazed control everything. But hemalurgy is still not cool with me yet.
That's fair. I'm so glad you explained it that way, because I mean that is kind of the tension of the moment, is like, okay, but like I'm not cool with this.
Yeah.
I know earring's bad. Earring can't be good now.
Yeah, but knowing that Sazed can use it potentially, like as a deity, could use it as a means of understanding and recognizing when somebody is praying to him, or however they want to describe it, whatever the word is. I don't think pray is proper, because he explicitly says not to pray to him, but to meditate, and just using it as a gauge to say like, hey, this person is actively thinking about and actively like trying to be their best self in the ways that I set forward, without actually being omnipresent and like interactive still gives him an idea of how many people and who and where his following is, which would be useful information no matter what. So that's kind of my vibe that I get off of it when I remove myself from the immediate, like, icky feeling of hemalurgy.
I love these conclusions that you're drawing. I think that they work very well. I think that it makes for such an interesting, like, tapestry to think about, because if you think about the earring, it's also, and we think about the rules that we know with Rune and whatnot, the connection of the earring allows for Sazed Harmony to directly interface with the user, right? So it's also like a lot of people inside of Christian faiths, which Brandon is, like, often think of like praying as the mode of like speaking to God, right? And Sazed doesn't want that. Instead, he has you pierce an earring, and whatever you do, whatever you say, whatever, not what you think, because your thoughts aren't accessible, but whatever you do in the moment in which you're pierced, in theory, because of the way that we know how Rune interacts, Sazed's aware of. And so, like, he gets the gist of what's going on with you and has a sense of, especially because he preaches this meditation, he has a sense of if you're off balance, right? And so if you're off balance as a god, he could approach you and like try to help or fix or like, you know, it's so fundamentally fascinating. I think a lot of books play with the idea, and a lot of fantasy plays with the idea of gods being real, right? But this is an option for a god to actually answer a prayer that feels so grounded and fantastic in the right ways that I don't know if I can't think of any other comparison from anything that I've read. Like, this is so, Sazed is so approachable as a god. And then in addition, the system is built out in such a way that worship is generally, you know, not appreciated. And then he is really, as he's always been, a source of advice, and that just like it all meshes so well. I that's the one thing I can't fault this entire story, is how well it all meshes. God, yeah. This is just one subtle example of Era 1's impact on Era 2, and how fantastically composed the planet of Scadrial is as such.
Mm-hmm. It's deep.
It's so good. It's so good.
It's so hard, good.
Yeah. It's hard to talk about. Hard to talk against, I should say. They nail it for the most part. So we move on from the conversation about the path and kind of the conversation about hemalurgy, Rune, and the way that all connects now. Wax is flashed out of this temporary consumption with his work when he remembers Lessie while holding the bullet in his hand and continues to work on his house's ledgers, avoiding treading in his Uncle Edwarn's well-trodden footsteps as a gambler, as someone that's not focusing on what's in front of him, as someone that's distracted by other details. What'd you make of this in this moment for Wax?
I mean, this is reinforcement of and entrenching of what I see to be a theme in this book throughout the rest of this story, and that of that being one of guilt and being haunted by the past and doing whatever you can to not repeat those mistakes and not follow in the footsteps of what created those bad memories or created the downfall of your house in the past, and like mitigating repeating mistakes seems to be a recurring theme. It's also, I mean, he's haunted by Lessie and is constantly seeing that blood on the wall smile imagery every time. Sometimes more visual than others, but present, always present.
Yeah. And I think haunted is a great way to describe him. At this point, Wax is surrounded by death. His career has been one of expounding death upon people. He's been surrounded by loss from family and from those he loves, and he's just been stricken by so much of this that it's left him being the only responsible party in these moments. And I think that our boy Envelope has a tough time with death and has a lot to deal with as it comes to death. I figured like demeaning him and calling him envelope was, enough to get you to bend, but clearly you're not ready for the our boy moniker. We'll move on.
Well, I made the face before I registered the envelope.
Before you fully registered the joke. I get it. All right. I won't refer to Wax's envelope, but it feels so right. Like if Wayne was to give Wax a nickname, and like nicknames don't always need to be shorter than your real name. I feel like it'd be envelope, like a piece of shit, like defined by a fucking letter and everything else. Anyway, we move on to chapter 4. And I gotta say, off the bat, I was just struck by the use of the term, as we've been talking about these different swears that are placed throughout. Harmony's forearms is definitely the oddest exclamation in the story so far. Like, this is...
I fucking love it.
It's good, don't get me wrong, but it's the weirdest one.
It's the weirdest one, but it also, like, it's the thing that defines him in the physical sense. His copper mines, they're bracers on his forearms. So, like, it makes sense. It makes sense to me. But fucking hilarious. Totally with you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. It is. So, we're well into chapter 4 after talking about our favorite swear so far here. But we've once again been paused for other means. And so we once again return to you a little bit more intoxicated than the last time. PJ, you grabbed another back half beer. What's the fun beverage that you're drinking?
Same as the first.
Oh, it's the same as the first. He's doing a repeat. It's a beer peat, folks. Okay.
Did year 5 swing juice, then year 5 again.
Hot damn, here we are. We find ourselves in a grand ballroom where we'll spend almost the entire rest of the story this week. This is, of course, the Yeoman Mansion, and it's a party for sure. In its own way, I think Brandon is pointing us here to show that while 300 years have passed, the society has improved a little. It hasn't altogether committed to changing itself completely. It's fun to be back in a ballroom, even if it's under auspicious circumstances with few changes.
Yeah, there are some differences to this, though. Like,
yeah,
number one, that this ball is attached to a special event, as opposed to, I don't know, it's Thursday. let's go. Which is kind of the way that the society operated under the Lord Ruler. So there's that difference there. But also, I think what it really highlights is the fact of that if the people are given the option, they're going to choose indulgence and partying when necessary and when able. Like, that's just kind of a human nature.
Agreed.
Deal.
Yes, agreed. It is a part of the nature of excess, or a culture of excess to some degree. So yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that at all. I just find that there's like an echoing here, so to speak, through the writing, which is one of excess, one of this top end culture that we are once again being brought into. We're not seeing it from a lower perspective necessarily in the same way that we were through the Final Empire. So even though in his own right, Wax is kind of thought of as lower because of his time in the roughs and is thought of as very different, there's some mirroring there.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely something. I really enjoyed the conversation that Steris and Wax share as they're evaluating the ballroom together. It really highlights how different they are from each other and how even their assumptions of people as they're looking around the room are different.
Yeah, their focuses seem to be very split, whereas Wax focuses on the setting and the decor and just the opulence in general. Steris is focusing on the people and who's present and why, and really breaks down like the social aspects of this indulgent event. Like, it's a lot more varied, not varied, but a lot deeper than just the indulgence that's portrayed.
Yeah. There's this difference too, where I think to some degree, Wax assumes either very little or the worst in people in these moments when he's looking around the room, because he's looking for threats. And Steris is dressing down motives as she's looking around the room, or like reasons as to why people are here, right? Those are two very different poles to be evaluating the people in the room.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up here too. Yeah, I wanted to bring up here too that she brings up a third religion that we haven't heard of up until this point when she's evaluating one of the couples, which is that of Sliverism and that of worshiping old Iron Eyes. What do you think of that?
I mean,
my friend,
Iron Eyes and old Iron Eyes specifically, I think, or no, I'm thinking old Ironsides. Was Marsh
old
called
Ironside is Lorne, but
right. Was old Iron Eyes ever attributed to Marsh, or is that just Iron Eyes? And it was ironic that he became an Inquisitor because he was always called Iron Eyes because of his eye color.
I think I was adding the flourish of old Iron Eyes, not that he was referred to as that way, but yes, it is kind of an irony that he was referred to as Iron Eyes because he was the tin eye.
Irony.
Yeah. Oh my God. I can't deal with the metallurgic humor and the depth here. But you're not wrong. Yes. Needless to say, you are correct. He was referred to as Iron Eyes, and then as such was given Iron Eyes, and now there's that briefly ironic moment, and then we move forward.
Yeah, I think it's not a mistake that we're at the Yeoman Mansion, considering Yeoman worship the Lord Ruler, and I believe Sliverism to be the worship of the Lord Ruler and his ilk, which would, not in a necessarily aligned way, bring Marsh into the fold as well, being an Inquisitor.
Do you think Marsh is still alive?
Interesting.
I guess, even to pose it a little bit further, do you think anyone from the original crew is still alive? Including Marsh. But
Marsh, I think, would make sense to still be alive because he didn't explicitly die. And he has 14 spikes, I think, one of which is probably gold. And presumably has access to the exact same combination of metals that the Lord Ruler had in order to stay alive for thousands of years. So I think if anyone were to stay alive, Marsh would be it. Obviously, Sazed. I don't think anyone else has the capacity to do so, unless given something off screen and miraculously.
Yeah, no, this is totally a raw prediction. So I think you use the two that you had the firmest examples for, and anything else would be a pure speculation.
I mean, even Spook has been bestowed upon him Mistborn abilities, but that doesn't allow for hundreds, extending life. So maybe Kelsier. Still going to stick by that one.
Okay. All right. Wait, maybe Kelsier? You're taking in maybe Kelsier?
I'll remove the maybe. I think Kelsier is still around.
I can't wait for that one to pay off. And moving on from that, bam! This wedding we're talking about, of course, is the wedding we had our little chat about last week. Thanks again to Michelle for joining us, and I'm so sorry that your beautiful fictional wedding here is interrupted by a couple of thugs and thieves. It's so cool that we got to have this conversation, and also we're completely blindsided by a lot of the reality of the conversation. For me, at the very least, I was blindsided because I knew exactly what was coming, and I was like, oh shit, that's so fucking cool.
It's such a cool reveal. It's a really cool Easter egg.
Yeah.
That's a relationship that has to exist now. They're not allowed to break up because of this book.
They've been immortalized in text. Now, I think based on our conversation a week ago, they're doing great.
They're doing great.
It was very cool, and I had a grand old time, despite Riverside giving us a pain in the ass on the episode and making us release it a bit late. Not that anyone outside of the people who are listening to it immediately will know that, but I greatly enjoyed our time chatting about that episode.
I did too.
But thank you again, Michelle, for coming on the show and chatting with us. And, thanks for contributing to the whole canon in such a substantial way between the 17th Shard and everything else that you do. Cheers.
Cheers.
So, moving on, of course, we're in the midst of this wonderful wedding, and the Harms and Wax all gather at the table and are served by a waiter with a familiar voice, one that Wax recognizes. And of course, it's Wayne. Marcy almost begins to piece together who the server is when Wax interrupts and distracts, bringing the focus of the conversation back to the Vanishers and the abductions. We also figure out that Marcy knows a lot more about Wax and law keeping than she'd let on to begin with.
Yeah, so Wayne, fucking master of disguise. Such a fun
I want to be a master of disguise. I want to be a master of disguise. I want to be a master. They look turtly enough in the turtle suit. Anyway, sorry.
He does a great job, but also
he is turtly enough for the Turtle Club, for the record.
He is. Marcy is super astute.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't understand how well we're able to get like these adept characters, and like they're very good at what they're good at, but they're also just negating each other's like things they're good at, and it still feels satisfying. You know, like she's able to notice that, oh, there's something up. That's Wayne. While he's still like really good at what he's doing. And like it doesn't feel jarring to pull one character out of his or her like strong suit. It's just, it feels like a needle has been thread in this scenario. I don't know. Does that make sense? Am I coming out of nowhere?
No, it definitely makes sense. It is a very finely threaded needle where she's never revealing too much information, and he's never revealing between. So we've got our three players inside of the scene, right? We've got Wax, we've got Wayne, we've got Marcy for the most part, and Steris and Uncle Harms. God, what's his name? Jackstum Harms. Anyway. So given kind of the group of people that we have at the table, there is a delicate needle that I think is being threaded all the time, which I think is something that Brandon didn't ever really approach before in the previous books, right? Like this is, I think, so delicately handled and creates so much tension because of the way that the conversation is so balanced and like will one hand tip before another in different moments. That also makes you really appreciate Wayne's ability to A, blend in, and B, like pull into time bubbles and like talk on the side and then pull back in to like thread a needle very well, including like on his own where he's like, I can imagine scenes in a Wayne POV being like him pulling into a time bubble and being like, okay, gotta get ready, gotta think about this, can I do this? Okay, let's scruffy up the hair, let's do this, let's like ruffle there's just so much prep work that I can imagine in Wayne's part inside of a bubble. I don't know, I love the blend that's done here so well between these three protagonists. So
yeah,
I know that didn't exactly answer your question, but
but there wasn't really a question to it.
Your comment
gives more foundation to my comment.
Man, and Wayne's jokes, like, let it be known, I appreciated the humor in Mistborn Era 1. I really like the jokes. I think they're well done. And Wayne is very much, I know that we've used this a lot in comparison specifically to Sanderson's work, but he's very Whedon-esque again. Like he's got the witty one-liners, he's got some funny bits, he's got some punchy, like Wayne feels like he's torn, not like he's a character necessarily from Firefly, but as though you ripped the jokes out of Firefly and stapled them onto Wayne in this mode, like it stapled them onto the character. Yeah, I don't know, I love it. I unabashedly can't explain it. I fucking love Wayne. I would die for Wayne.
Yeah, he's clever and he's fun. But he's fun and jokey without pulling you out of the story. Mm-hmm. You know?
Right.
Like it'd be so easy. It'd be so easy, especially in those Whedon-esque kind of situations, to be like, you wrote that to be a joke, not to be in line with the character. And it's funny, but now I have to like immerse myself. This maintains the immersion while still like recognizing this is a really fucking goofy character.
Yeah, that's a great call. I totally agree. And I think that is something that is so well earned through Wayne's characterization and performances of this that it's just like, fuck yeah, I adore it. What do you think about Wayne's reveal to Marcy and Marcy's reveal of her knowledge about everything that the boys did in the roughs, as though they were kind of these legends, and talking about them? Not so much, I want to clarify just a smidge, not so much about like all the things that they did and accomplished, but more about the fact that the legends made it her way, or that they made it into the city to begin with from the roughs. What do you make of that story?
I mean, as far as reveals go, I think I talked about this a little bit, but I think building on that, I appreciate that we didn't have to wait long for it. We get a lot of tension being built very, very quickly, but we don't get a lot of dramatic irony, and we don't get a lot of like, oh, this character knows about that character and that character knows about this character, but like they don't really share the information back and forth. We get that dramatic irony and the tension being built very quickly and then cut, and creating this dynamic of a scholar of these two interacting with these two makes for a very cool dynamic.
Yeah, because she is so learned, right, in those moments, and she's just got this like sort of base instinct of like, well, if they do this, like the natural reaction that you should be doing, as I've studied it, is this. And there's just this interesting dichotomy of like the lived experience versus the learned experience that I will definitely get into as we explore the next couple of chapters, but especially as they're just worshipped here in this moment on the page, it's fun. It's fun. I can't remember. I think it was my second listen to this. I was playing within the first 30 hours of my Elden Ring experience, and I recall the specific zone in which I heard this for the second time, and like it really all like clicked with me, right? And I got absolutely destroyed by this weird spider-looking thing with the spear. That's it. That's all. That's the whole comment. But I specifically remember re-experiencing this text in that moment, dying and being like, oh yeah, Marcy is so smart and so book smart, and we also have our street smarts, and now we're going to merge those together. And it feels so obvious when you deconstruct it that way, but it's so well executed that I don't give a shit. Like it's a perfect example of like how proper character building can just work for you in these contexts. So they finally circle back to thinking about the Vanishers and trying to work out this problem as a group. When those doors are open at both ends of the ballroom, burst open violently. Something else is about to happen. PJ. No, but
you and I have talked a lot about adaptation and the idea of a movie or a miniseries, or like we talked about this with Michelle. We talked about it a lot. This book feels so well paced, and like this, the reason I bring this up right now is this is where I was thinking about it while I was reading it. It feels so well paced for a basically 1-to-1 adaptation in a movie. Like it's so well, concisely and tightly written that you could write you could do a single movie without missing almost anything that was on the page. Like so little time is wasted here, and I don't know, that's very well displayed in this scene.
I agree 100%. I think that that's the strongest point to be made here, is that this book, 60,000 words-ish, is ripe for adaptation. This is literally perfect and ready to go. I think it'd be a solid hour and a half. Like the whole thing, each of the 3 chunks that we've broken out feel like a solid 30-minute sections to me, at the very least. And I think when you get through them, you'll agree that's like, this is hour 45 at most. But it's perfect. It's blistering. It's brilliant. And like brilliant in the way, like it's not ingenious or anything like that, but it is so well thought and well wrought that it's like, fuck, bulletproof in its own right.
in this section, we get heavy exposition to heavy action basically in the same sentence.
Yeah.
In a way that's like, it feels like it should be whiplash, but it just makes sense.
Yeah. Right. It's like, this is the natural progression of the way the scene was going to go. And like, you knew it, and it's just like, you're set into it and you're like, well, of course. Oh, fuck. We knew that this was going to happen. This is the trend for them, you know? And so you're like, I think I've said this a couple of times in comments and across our different podcasts and things like that. But one of the things that I look for in really good storytelling is something that is eminently obvious. Like, it is something that is going to happen and that there is no other speculation about what could happen in this moment. There's only one truth, and that you see this more often, I think, with improv, when people like have to lead into a truth, or they have to like build in a direction in something like Critical Role or Dimension 20 or things like that. That's more eminent because someone's playing a character. But I think as a writer, you have specific moments in which you feel a character's truth, or a moment's truth, or an event's truth. And this is the only thing that could happen to make the story move forward logically without starting to stretch a gap. And it's perfect. I mean, can't imagine it any other way.
Right.
So with that, we move into chapter 5, the shortest chapter of the week. We return to these almost gangster-esque thugs, and Wayne is reluctant to put his weapons down in the face of these strongly armed but historically non-violent thieves. And there's a lot of familiarity going on here surrounding the crime. Marcy attempts to take note of what's happening by taking down a drawing of the guard's face, and Wax notes both a familiar voice as well as an individual that he classifies as Kross-blooded. There's a lot of information that gets kind of spilled over here. What do you think?
So I really appreciated Marcy's nervous talking as a means of calming herself, because it becomes a very helpful tool for us as the readers to understand the scene as a whole. Like, it's this built-in exposition plot device, you know? Like, it's just being able to calmly describe what's happening around her narratively
through a neuroses, basically. Like, it's explained through something that she has to do, and so it feels logical to us because of the way that it's built.
But it just gives us a ton of information.
Yeah.
That we wouldn't otherwise naturally come to be.
Totally.
I wouldn't say necessarily struggling with, but hung up on the Kross-blooded thing.
Okay.
It makes my understanding of how hemalurgy works much more muddy, because it introduces hemalurgy and hemalurgically created beings into a tappable and mingleable genetic pool, which makes for really strange interactions. I don't know.
This isn't something that we talked a whole lot about in this podcast, of course, or anything like that, but there is like an ongoing conversation about races in D&D, again, to like circle this drain a little bit more, and the way that they like reproduce and the reason that they reproduce. This does seem to ask a question about a line that we didn't know if it could be crossed before or not. Could Kross breed with humans? Kross reproduction, as we understood it, was strictly related to hemalurgy. Could there be something else? And that's kind of the question that this adds.
Yeah, that's really what it adds.
Yeah,
entirely.
It's definitely not answered, but it definitely adds that question.
And then it creates, if that's the case, what are the implications of that answer in Khandra?
Yeah.
And what's the other? There's 3.
Mistrates?
Khandra, no.
Is the third. But
yeah, Inquisitors. Because they're people, but technically so are the others. So
yeah.
In literally exactly the same way. They just look more like people.
Yeah, right. Kinda. Conjure. Yeah, this gets into some like funky things that I know that we've talked about before, but like the fact that like Inquisitors are definitely the blurriest on that line, so far as we're aware. The other two are stretched a little bit further. Kross, though, being the mitochondria, are almost so far gone that it's like changeling-esque. Like, how does a changeling's reproduction work?
I imagine them as changelings. Like, straight up, if you were to ask me, what does a chondra in its true body look like? I think it's a changeling in StarCraft.
Fair. Oh, more like a StarCraft changeling. That's different. I was thinking a D&D changeling. I would agree with you more on the StarCraft changeling. I think that's better to imagine them as, which is something that's very speciologically different than anything else. Anyway, point being, don't need to circle this drain. It does raise the question about Kross, but it doesn't answer it. And it's like, Kross blooded, huh? Like, what's that mean? That's a new thing. And I think that's important because I think old Brandon, Era 1 Brandon, would have been tempted to answer that question immediately, as opposed to letting it live a little bit inside of the story and make you think about it.
Mm-hmm. It's fair.
So, yeah, cool. All right, lots to unpack there in the long term. But
what we definitely know then, and I guess I can't say definitely, but
sure,
what this implies is that hemalurgy affects and alters DNA.
Maybe.
In a way that can be genetically passed.
Maybe.
Or they're misappropriating something else.
We know that Kross don't reproduce up until through Era 1. Kross do not reproduce the way that humans do. We know that. They use bodies to do so. So something else is clearly going on, and we don't have a rejoinder or an explainer for it right now. So we're left questioning how this person is Kross blooded. But we do know that they retain the features to some degree of a Kross, but also a good amount of humanity, a lot more of humanity than any Kross before that we've seen.
Right.
So, Patrius, the constable of the 8th Octant Guard, speaks up in defiance to the leader and gets smacked across the face by that leader. The group continues to roam around, collecting goods and belongings of everyone they can at each of the tables, matching Wax's Holmesian instincts. Wayne, of course, is very mad that the man took his fucking lucky hat. How dare he?
The lucky hat comment, like, is so funny. It's so good. But it's also, I feel like, a comment that I'd heard before.
Okay.
Out of context, without any understanding of any of the characters or anything like that. I feel like I saw something about a lucky hat. I don't know what it was. Didn't spoil anything. But like reading that, maybe like it wasn't a new thing for me, and I'm not sure what it was.
Okay, because of the lucky hat. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Move on. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that thought. When Wayne brings up oh my God. When Wayne brings up Wax's paranoia, it almost gives me like Batman vibes. Like it almost gives me that sense in the Dark Knight trilogy when we have those confrontation in different moments where it's like, well, you're a paranoid rich man. You know, it reminds me of something pulled directly from Nolan. The thugs make moves to like take their hostages so they can make it out safely and single out terrorists for abduction. Excuse me. Christ. They single out Steris for abduction, and Maricy's naivete is on display when Tarson, the Kross-blooded individual, picks up her drawing that she'd made of these vanishers earlier. This whole scene is... there's a lot going on, but at the same time, it feels like an execution of a heist. Like we're seeing a heist from the other side, considering the way this novel started, like we were saying this whole time.
Yeah, I hadn't quite put my finger on it, but the idea of calling out Wax's paranoia being something out of a Batman Nolan film is a perfect descriptor of what I was thinking in that. So I appreciate you bringing that up because it's very in line with what I was thinking. There's a lot more to the pointing out Wax's paranoia thing, but I feel like I kind of got into that previously.
Yeah, Wax in general is a little bit off kilter. And like we've drawn comparisons between him and Sherlock Holmes to some degree up until this point, but he is not as solid on anything as Holmes is ever. Like, he is not so firm in his judgments. He's maybe 60 to 70%. There's a lot more questioning to him than a lot of the popular detectives that we might cite.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Petraeus speaks up, calling the thieves a coward or cowards for taking the women, and the leader shoots him. The world freezes, and Wax and Wayne prepare in the speed bubble, ready to fight back against these 37 bad guys. 2 against 37. Boy, we're in for some shit.
So this is there's a little bit that happens in between there.
Yeah.
And specifically, there's the comment about, like, have some fun, get it out of your system, or whatever it is. Like, I can't remember the exact quote, but it makes me wonder, knowing what we know later about the crew and, like, what's going on and, like, who's doing what, and, like, is it a couple crews, blah, 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 blah. Like, there's a lot of stuff that we get to kind of parse through later as far as information goes. But knowing that and having that in mind, looking at this, was this a demand by the hired crew saying, like, hey, we want to shoot some people this time, like, make that happen? Or if it was a means of increasing morale, understanding, like, hey, these guys have been kind of teased by these weapons and they've been clearly wanting to use them. So, like, if I let them use them, maybe they'll be more inclined to work better with me next time. Or if it's neither of those things and it's just changing up the MO again, saying, like, hey, they know us to be nonviolent, so let's be violent now so they can be a little bit more on their toes next time. Or if it's simply frustration from the leadership and just being tweaked a little bit too hard and just wanting to have a little bit of chaos. Like, there's a lot of ways that could have gone, and I could see any of those equally being kind of an answer to why they suddenly got violent this time, seemingly without reason to.
Provocation, yeah. I feel like I agree with you on the side of the increasing morale side of things. They weren't intending to get violent. The leader getting violent is a different stretch, I think, because of the sort of class of this attendance, that they're, like, the fact that Petraeus, the captain of this guard, is there and that he was willing to put up a fight against him seems more like that person, that leader, was trying to put Petraeus out with the intent of ensuring that further violence wouldn't be necessary. However, after that and the tensions rose, it feels like it's that, like you were saying, sort of increase in morale. Like, it felt like it was more of a play to, do a little bit of what you need. Release that valve a little bit. Take out that pressure because you are a bunch of hired thugs for the most part.
Or, I guess, as an additional answer, taking out Petraeus, realizing, fuck, that's a high-ranking member of the guard that we're up against. Making it less of an individual attack on them and more of a more generalized attack on noble society takes the pointed pressure off and increases the general pressure, but decreases the personal I'm a fucking get you pressure from the actual, like, constables.
Yeah, I can feel that. I feel like I still stick by the idea on the middle that we were talking about, the idea that this is a release valve more than anything else.
I agree. That makes sense.
As far as the leader's action goes, yeah, that's a little bit of a different train. All right. With that, we go into chapter 6 here. And the fight commences. Wayne drops the speed bubble that he and Wax are trapped in, and Wax notes where these thugs are aiming to nab their attention and distract from everyone else, try to be that center of attention so that they're all aiming at him. Wax makes himself far heavier by tapping his steel mind and pushes, making him capable of pushing far stronger on objects than otherwise someone who is just an Allomancer could. This is a great example of compounding by using these forces together to really create something that's different than what we've experienced before. And when the Hail of Bullets comes and he just Neo hands them to make them cascade in a way to wave around the bubble, man, that's pretty fucking sweet in that moment when he just like puts them down.
This is where that shooting through a bubble description comes in, right? This scene?
I think they talk about how it's not viable. Not perfectly viable. Yeah.
Specifically, because so I appreciate that very much because of what I talked about before, in that like when something's inside and out of the barrier, there's going to be different influences in a different way, as opposed to just being like forces acting upon it differently. There's going to be stretching that happens.
Yeah.
Because part of it's moving faster than another part, and realistically part of it is moving and the other part's not. So it's going to compress. It makes for a really weird, all of it's really weird. It's all really weird.
Right.
Because then what I want to do is get into light and how light interacts with it. And because if light interacts with it separately, you can't see anything out of it. It'd be black.
It would
void.
Be impossibly difficult to make those connections. Yeah,
but that's not what we're dealing with. So what it does make me wonder, sorry, I keep I'm meandering a little bit, but we can't deal with gunshots out of the steel bubble, but we could deal with, and it doesn't come into play, but I have a feeling it will. Steel pushes do not physically interact with any boundaries, so they could hypothetically happen from within a steel bubble or within a bend alloy, like time bubble. Yeah. So Wax could stack up and use a bunch of steel pushes and then drop the bubble and everything pushes out all at once. So he'd have the precision of individual shots against things with the immediacy of a more generalized push. And I'm expecting that to happen at some point in this story, but that's all I'm thinking about right now.
You're just trying to work out the pairings interactions, and I adore that. I really like that. I appreciate that they, too, very clearly when they're walking into this is not their first rodeo by any stretch. They've been through a number of shitstorms, and they kind of know each other's behaviors and what they need to do. As such, Wayne sneaks around the room, making his way around to beat the hell out of those folks while they're reloading with their aluminum bullets and putting them into the guns that they change. I have to ask, though, as we're talking about all of these weapons and like different approaches to combat, what do you make of Wayne's choice to use dueling canes in a firefight in his individual speed bubbles as opposed to literally anything else?
I mean, we get knowledge later on that he's confounded by firearms, but ignoring that and just like making a realistic understanding of like his abilities, what he's able to do, what he does. This is a habit born out of practicality. It's not metal, so it's not affected by Allomancers. It's easily concealed. It's quick and it's light. Like it's held on his person. Like there's a lot of reasons why he would use dueling canes.
Sure.
But a lot of it, I think, deals with the fact that he's somebody that is stealth. He's a rogue. He's an Allomantic rogue. Mm-hmm. So be stealthy as much as possible.
It's a great way to put it, because it's like he can also use those regardless. As we know, as we understand things currently, guns inside of the speed bubble aren't particularly useful as is. Like, you could shoot someone within the speed bubble, it would all work fine, but you can't shoot outside of the speed bubble. So any of the prep that you would do would be just like aiming close to someone and then, you know, putting it down and then putting the bullet in their heart. Like, it's effective to a point, but you could be more effective in other ways. And I think that's kind of what he's good at.
And you wouldn't be able to cover up a gunshot with a cough.
Well, they don't even try to do that.
Will still happen.
Yeah. They don't.
But
yeah,
they're not shooting from within from within the speed bubble.
No, but even their plans in these moments, like they're not trying to cover them compared to, the conversations they were having.
I'm coming at it from a historical habit building perspective.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Like if you were to like get into the habit of using guns within a speed bubble, you'd have to figure out a way to conceal that or just not care about concealing it. But he seems much more like cautious of sneaking.
Yeah. To get back into the thread of the story here, Marcy is quickly grabbed by Tarson and is held in the same position as Lessie, flashing us back to the first scene in the novel, and Wax is paralyzed for a moment with the gun turning at him as opposed to holding it to her head, where she has her own moment of heroism, throwing her head back and headbutting him into the Tarson's chin while Wax shoots Tarson with her out of the way. It's kind of this like combination moment where it almost to our hero feels like this opportunity for him to overcome these events, and he can't get past the fact that she's trapped in his arms, but is able to beat it because of circumstance that she exerts as a person. What would you make of that moment?
I mean, I can imagine, maybe it's cliched, and that's why I can imagine it, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think it would still be a very impactful and really great cinematic storytelling moment of Wax looking at Marcy and this bandit leader, it flashing to Lessie and Bloody Tan.
Yeah.
But those two in the ballroom and then flashing back, like just more visuals of what he's thinking about in his head. It's just so well set up for cinematography. I can just imagine it already.
Mm-hmm. I think this scene and this book as a whole is almost, like we said earlier, it's just so easily adaptable. I think this is a perfect example, though, of the way that you would cut to quiet in this moment in which Wax has to make a decision, and then you see everything change, but at the same time, you see the fact that he only sees what he saw before in the face of Lessie and Tan. I love it. I think that you're totally onto it there.
Mm-hmm.
But he injures Tarson by shooting him, of course, but we also find that Wayne is injured, and we also find out, of course, about his abilities, that he's able to heal himself with the ferrochemical power of gold. Phew, god dang, we can't let our boy be hurt, and our boy is okay, so long as he doesn't get shot in the head, as we're made aware. Wax, at this point, in the middle of the battle, is almost certain that the leader is Miles, and the leader's body is seemingly dragged out of the room. Marcy dispatches the final bandit in the room, saving Wax so that he can chase after Steris, but instead he finds himself surrounded by a bunch of constables in the courtyard. There's a lot to talk about in this resolution here. Fire away through each of the bits.
Constables in the courtyard. Cops are always getting in the way of a good chase scene.
Oh, no.
So I think the most fun and topical one is...
True.
In general, though, there is so much that happens in the end of this scene. Like it feels like so many different points happening, and like it's just an acceleration of the fight, and it all happens so quickly. It's hard to keep. One question I have about the end of this scene, the end of this fight, does gold work passively like pewter does, or does it need to be physically like and actively tapped?
So pewter as an elementic metal does not need to be actively consumed. However, so far as we're aware, everything in ferrochemy needs to be actively tapped in order to be running.
Okay.
So far as we're aware.
So Wayne has to be conscious in order to heal himself.
Yep.
Can you tap a metal for someone else?
No, because you cannot access someone else's metal mind. So no, like, there's no way to...
Could you physically force someone to access their own metal mind?
Not that we're aware of.
Okay, cool.
Good to know. That said, I feel like that's the clarification, right? Is like allomancy and feruchemy are different in a number of ways. Allomancy can automatically feel itself because of the nature of having something in your stomach and it being like a bodily response, versus tapping is something that's almost seemingly, based on all of our other explanations, directly connected mentally. Like there's that mental response that I think is so critical to a lot of this. So
makes sense.
Yeah. Breton really dresses Wax down for the legality of what's been done here, despite the potential moral right of saving these folks. And they managed to get away with quite a bit, as no one was killed except for Betrayus, of course, on the side of the hostages and all the people of the party, and that they had managed to kill 25 of the baddies themselves. What do you make the conflict here between our two different types of lawmen and their conflicting senses of justice? We talked about this a little bit right away at the beginning when we were talking about the sense of like, where does Wax stand on the sort of lawful good, lawful neutral side versus otherwise. But I think that this extends a little bit further, as we might think about, beyond just the laws and more into what needs to be done in the moment. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, you know me, always going to be an advocate of bureaucracy and following the designated path over effective, efficient results.
Oh my God. Can you like, if you wouldn't mind, I could use some effective, efficient promotion paths. Can you just like, advocate for bureaucracy for me there? Can you like be, I need my government man.
This road has several potholes, and we are going to spend 10 times the amount of money and take 3 times the amount of time to fill the pothole. And all the while, you'll be frustrated and we'll be frustrated. And you'll be happy to know that that's just how bureaucracy works.
Something 21 pilots, something potholes, something. My government knows something. We're here. Breton is a piece of shit. And Breton, well, he's not so bad. Let's be real. Breton is an advocate for the bureaucracy that we were speaking about for a moment there.
I would say that makes him a bad person.
He's not innately bad, though. He's not, like, let's talk about...
He's a worse person.
But, needless to say, we end the chapter with Marasi kissing Wax on the cheek before departing, thanking him for saving his life, and Wax is met with another frustration. He's meant to marry Steris, but is conflicted because of Marasi's intelligence and beauty, feeling more like a natural match for him than otherwise, including Steris, despite an age gap. What'd you think of this sort of addition to kind of a romantic triangle of sorts?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what I think yet. Those feelings are definitely there and very clearly there. There's also an air of obliviousness in the next section, and it just makes it seem complicated. And really what I get out of this is Wax seems more distracted by the mystery that's going on than anything actually romantic that's happening in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Or at the very least, burying himself in the mystery enough so that he couldn't think about the romantic in the moment,
That's fair. Yeah.
It's an A and B. Like, I wouldn't dissuade from either side of the opinion, but...
Mm-hmm. My one takeaway from that, and not takeaway, but my one argument against that is the next section where he's stomping all over the social norms of, like, what to do with a single woman in a bedroom or in like a closed door room. And he doesn't even take into consideration that it might be a problem. And if he had any sort of romantic feelings towards her, that air of distraction, I don't think would be so much in play.
Oh yeah, definitely. Okay. So we're on the same side of this, so to speak, because I think that I thought that you were playing the other direction, which is to say that, this is more aloof and more distracting than anything else, versus what you're saying is instead we have a very different confrontation, a very different scene where he's definitely leading into solving the puzzle more than anything else, despite, conflicting inclinations. Like, we do have an inclination that he thinks that she's attractive here. So at the very least, like, it's not completely off the table, but it is less likely.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I can agree with that for sure. Oh, and like, to end this chapter, I guess like Wayne is gonna crash at Wax's place as the story is officially on, baby.
Sleepover.
Let's go. What's up? Come visit me in North Carolina, you fucker. Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, the sleepover. Very excited. Very excited for the way this goes. All right. We go into chapter 7, our final chapter of the week. And now, for the first time, we switch point of views over to Maryse's. What do you think of this switch and her making the approach on the Ladrian mansion? What'd you think of that whole ordeal?
So she feels like such a perfect switch for a point of view. And I'm glad that we got this switch now at the end of this section before like ending reading for the week, because I would have otherwise been questioning the entire time whether or not we were going to get another point of view at all, or if it was just going to be Wax's the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
So Marcy has this background and this outlook that complements the story so well. She's able to give us more insight, not only into the modern day society, but also into Wax and Wayne themselves as like law keeping legends. So like we get the historical background on our other main character through the lens of this really knowledgeable main character. It's a really cool dynamic.
Yeah, it's got a nice natural sort of dichotomy to it as we think about the way that these two characters compare themselves, right? And I think that's the nature of like dueling POVs to some degree, is like seeing the way that other people's actions are evaluated by someone else, or your own actions are evaluated by someone else. I think is incredibly enlightening to the way that like people might revere someone like Wax, right? We talked a little bit ago about like vigilantism and the way that could be sort of supported through like Wax's past heroics. And this is sort of a way of like giving a little bit of a mirror to it through history, and like thinking about the way that character has existed through time and space and everything else. And I think going forward, it could also be a mirror to like evaluate events, and is I think a really like interesting POV to tag into the whole mess, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's
also a lot of embarrassment and a ton of faux pas that has seemingly been treaded on here as the conversation between the butler and Marcy Combs goes on. Combs, of course, being her last name. Combs and Holmes. Can we put a finer point on it, Mr. Sanderson? Are you aiming for, more whiz cheese on top of this delightful pie that I'm eating? Especially because, I think pie, I think sweet, and, whiz cheese on top of pie, just, I don't know. It's also fantastic because we really get different points of view of the mansion and our characters and how they're approaching these events as well. I especially love the idea of like Telemay and how we see him from other perspectives.
Yeah, it seems, based on like what I talked about before and what you just brought up, that the idea of decorum and social norms in general just kind of don't exist past the Ladrian front door.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm getting
front door.
This.
Yeah.
I really appreciated the look of this mansion and all of the things that are missing and out of place and weird from her perspective. Like the not super high class paintings inside of very, very fancy frames, and spaces where paintings should be in general and aren't. Like that sort of level of detail is a very sleuthy point of view. So putting ourselves in that mindset feels very natural here.
Especially since we've seen this mansion through Wax's perspective, and he glances over all of this, right? Like, he doesn't really pay attention to all of these finer details. And to see it from Maricy's perspective here lends it an entirely different light. It really paints two different pictures of the same place that we've seen. Like, I almost feel like from Wax's perspective, we almost see like generic mansion, generic everything. Like, these are sort of the generic things that I live through. But when we look through Maricy's eyes, it feels so much more refined and tighter and more visual, that it lends itself to a more like articulate view because of the way that she looks at things, which I love point of view perspectives for. So I'm really appreciative of that difference.
It makes me wonder, was this mansion ransacked of its like valuables before Wax got here? Or what were those like valuables sold as gambling debt at some point? We know he was good at like his uncle was good at gambling, so probably not. But
right,
like my assumption is that he like this house was taken advantage of in the interim before Wax got here, based on that description.
Yeah, totally. That feels like the most. I think I agree with you in the sense that I think that it was also taken advantage of, but I think that Wax also doesn't pay attention to it. I think that I would lend credence to both sides of what we're saying is that there's more of a dualistic approach here for sure.
No, I don't think Wax understands that, and I don't think he knows that.
Yeah.
But I don't think he realizes it because he's not trained to look at high society homes because he hasn't been there.
Yeah. He's been locked in isolation to some degree.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not the kind of thing that he's in tune with.
For sure. I love the reverence that Maricy has towards Wax as well as this like sort of absolute legend as she's exploring the place. It's truly like a meeting your hero kind of moment for her, given what we know about what she's going through and what she's studying. And Wax is working away, very much toiling like Sherlock Holmes might, breaking down this mystery of who these folks really are and what their capabilities are, and how he like takes these approaches to science, and talks about the resources of the city versus the outskirts. There's a lot here. There's a lot to like pick through with Maricy and Wax's interaction.
Yeah, there's something funny about that feeling here. It comes through so well despite the fact that it was like these characters have met before. And they've spoken and they've interacted, but it's a different setting. It's a different vibe. And Maricy has this like ball of nervousness inside of her. And despite the fact that those nerves feel unfounded because they've already interacted and they've already broken that tension, it still feels natural.
Mm-hmm.
This setting changes it. It's Wax's home turf. So he feels different now. I don't know.
I mean, he's got a little bit more like power in theory, being on his own home turf.
That's true.
I don't think that's like universal or anything. Like he's really like wielding it over top of her. But I mean, it's cliche to say that he like sounds more at home,
Yeah.
So he's more himself in
that's
turn.
True.
Yeah. Just feels kind of like a natural progression, especially like Maricy is invading that, but at the same time, she's not a problem. She's not, and he's also not reacting negatively. He's pro her being there in these moments, which I think is important to clarify as well. It's like, he's not like, no, shoo, I don't want you in my place. It's more like, oh, what do you have to bring to this equation? What can you lend to our thoughts on how we approach this?
Right.
Yeah. That said, we end up chatting a lot here about the groups themselves, the potential for them actually being two groups, with a backer maybe looking to abduct the women, and then a front group that is the violence end of the stick. But why the women? What do you think about their thoughts about the genealogy tree dating back to the Lord Mistborn, and Wax's missed assumption on them all being Elemantic, given Steris's state as a non-Allomancer. What do you think about the whole kind of equation?
I mean, it's been another few hundred years. So the lines of allomancy have been diluted, maybe to the point of being irrelevant, or at least being way less reliable in tracking from the perspective of trying to choose somebody most likely to birth an allomancer. So there's that. The Lord Mistborn, which I think I talked about this before, but I'm assuming is Spook, being the most powerful of all like modern history, makes for a very, very easy path of genealogy. It's super traceable. So I think it'd be difficult to really try to do what these people are doing, presumably, without going directly off of the most obvious genetic line.
Yeah, definitely. And to your point, I guess one of the things that I feel like is kind of posed here is that like the only line of Allomancers for the most part are derived from the Lord Mistborn and some of those powers, but not entirely. Like very clearly, obviously, Edgard, the Ladrians in general have a continued line, and there are some other houses that likely do, but they're predominantly abducting from the people that they know are most related to the Lord Mistborn.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the most pure bloodline at this point.
Yeah. They're trying
with
back
the highest chance
as they can.
Yeah. It's all at this point is a math equation. It's a probabilities equation.
Yeah. Definitely. I realized I think it was a little bit ago, but I did want to make comment on the joke about Wax and Wayne when they nailed the guy in the balls when they meant to go for the eyes, and it was Wayne's dagger, right? Like Wax makes the comment about trying to throw to hit. Like there are so many good fucking jokes in here that it's so hard to talk about them all, but that one hit me in the back of my head as I'm wrapping up the episode, or as we're wrapping up the episode. I have to mention it because it's
pretty awesome.
You know, like the tension in the scene is such in which making a joke doesn't make any fucking sense from Wax's perspective as a character. But at the same time, it's so good as a moment of comic relief for him to be like, yeah, no, I threw the dagger. I was trying to get his eye. I got his balls, but then I got his eyes afterwards. And it's just like, oh my God, dude. No. What?
Yeah.
Brutal. But as far as the genealogy tree goes, yeah, it definitely poses questions about like, these are the most naturally innate Allomancers as we could possibly assume. This chapter ends post are trying to work out the PP Sylvia tree, with the Wax setting us up for next week, mentioning that Wayne is out causing a little mischief.
It's a fun prospect. I'm excited to see how that goes.
Yeah.
Because while Wayne is a great master of disguise, he's about as subtle as a firecracker.
Yeah. No, I could not agree more. That's the most accurate way of putting it. Like he is literally, I can imagine so many metaphors about talking about inadequacies, and like he stretches all of my beliefs on the idea that someone could be stealthy and do something ever. Like we made the joke that the master of disguise earlier. Half of the joke of that movie is that he fucking sucks, and it is so obvious that he is who he is all the time. Right. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's
part
the
of
entire
the genius of the movie. Yeah,
the entire joke of the movie.
Yeah, and so in these moments, like I have the same thing with Wayne, where it's like, oh, buddy, come on, you know, right? Like oh no, you don't get it. It feels very similar in these early moments, so I very much look forward to it.
Yeah.
All right.
Me too.
Cool. Well, anything else on this week? Anything that I skipped? I remembered the joke randomly that I had skipped earlier about the balls and trying to hit someone in the eye. And
I feel like we hit a lot of points. We hit more points than we had outlined for. So
We did. We definitely did. We stretched it in a bunch of different directions. So
we've been recording for 5.5 hours.
But regardless, next week, we are reading chapter 8 through 16. 8 through 16. So this is going to be the middle third of the book here, and we're gonna tackle it. We're gonna talk about it, and I'm so psyched. It's only 110 pages. It's barely more. It is less by word count than most of what we covered most weeks in the Hero of Ages. So,
right,
I'm stoked. Beyond that, that's where we'll leave you for this week.
Thank you, as always, to Tim and Andrew, our producers, for helping us keep our show's lights on. You can check out all of our links in the show notes. You can find our schedule, our Patreon, our previous episodes, our websites, all of our social media accounts, all in one very convenient location.
A special thank you, of course, to the 17th Shard and Michelle for coming on our show and talking with us about her special wedding that was immortalized inside the story, as well as many other things. We hope you give that episode a listen because it came out late and fucked with our schedule. Thank you, Riverside, for absolutely bottoming us in a critical week. Just kidding. Kind of not, but kind of am. But thank you so much to the 17th Shard and otherwise for being so hospitable and coming on the show. Michelle, it was fantastic to have you. Can't wait for the next time here. As PJ had mentioned, you can check us out, Words Whiskey Pod on Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, wordsandwhiskeyshow@gmail.com. If you want to send us any questions or any ideas or anything that you want us to talk about or any thank you notes or whatever you want, you can join us on Patreon at patreon.com/wordsandwhiskey. We're going to have a couple of new things coming out over the next month or so relating to the Patreon and some stretch goals that we have and that we want to accomplish. You can check out our t-shirts on TeePublic. You can follow that link inside of the links, as PJ had mentioned, with all of our other show notes inside of the notes. You can find it also at www.wordsandwhiskey.show/links. That said, this is probably one of the last weeks that we have t-shirts on TeePublic. We're going to be converting to a little bit of a different service and a self-hosted thing here pretty quick, in addition to some other small changes that you might see. If you want to hear more about changes, check out our Devil's Cut this week relating to changes. The only way you can listen to that is, PJ, on
Patreon. Patreon.com/wordsandwhiskey.
Give it a listen. Other than that, leave all of your favorite shows a 5-star review. I swear to God, if you don't, Erin from HowlerPod will come for you. And she listens to me, folks, like in a shocking change of events.
Scary.
So, like, also, yeah, terrifying, frightening. You leave a couple of months before she comes on and she's threatening you. You'd better take these months where I'm threatening you into consideration as a positive change, because it's only going to get worse from here, folks. I'm the benevolent dictator.
Chilling. The prospect is chilling.
All right. With that, we'll see you next week talking about chapters 8 through 16.
See you then.
Boy.